Okay, good evening. I will now call the November 6th regular Committee of the Whole meeting for the Town of Sydney to order. I am Councillor Sarah Duncan, the acting mayor for the evening. I have Councillors Novak, O'Keefe, and Rantoul to my left, Councillors Duck, Mayor McNeil-Smith, and Councillor Garnett to my right. We have a very packed agenda this evening, so I will be trying to ride time and give each of our presenters the time and the attention that each of them need. I'll begin with the territorial acknowledgement and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Saanich people who have been stewards of this land for millennia. We hope that all of our decisions tonight will be good stewards as well going forward. I will look to the approval of the agenda now, noting that we have our presentations. Laura Bernier and Patrick Stevens are in person to speak to item 6A. Jody Toit will be speaking to item 7A. Jordan Milne is here in person to present on our item 7B, and Richard Gill will be attending remotely. They will be looking for an extension on their time, potentially up to 15 minutes from the usual 10 for their presentation. And we have Kara Wilkie and Haley Gino McConnell, hopefully I pronounced that last one correctly, will be speaking to item 8A, the accessibility plan. And I'll be looking for somebody to make a motion to move those presenters up to 6B, since they are calling in from Toronto and it's getting late there. So if somebody will, oh, I'm sorry, I've turned. There we go. All right.
So moved,
sorry.
as amended.
Okay, and seconder.
Yeah, if I could just amend that we had the additional letter of correspondence.
Oh, thank you for catching that. And the letter of correspondence we received as a late item, which is addressing 7B from Gerald Moffat. Further discussion or further addition?
Just a question. So the accessibility plan presentation, is that, were we wanting to do that first, or is that the second presentation?
That is the second presentation. It would be 6B after the CRD's presentation.
Okay, so we're still gonna go with the CRD.
We'll
Okay, sure.
Well, I suppose you could move otherwise. That was a suggestion from staff, so I don't know if there was a concern one way or another. No. We'll keep it as 6B as the motion. Okay, thank you. I had the mover and the mayor. Did you second it as well as make your comment? Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor of as amended? Okay, that's unanimous. And that's the agenda. I will begin with our public participation period. So members of the public can approach the mic and speak to issues. I shall note that there are dedicated public participation opportunities that are associated specifically with 7A and 7B. So if you want to comment on either of those applications, come forward at that time. If you're commenting on another issue, then come forward at this time, please. Yeah, Charlene, come on forward. Richard, can you get the, thank you. You can reach?
Hi. Hi, my name is Charlene Froome, and I'm a resident of North Saanich. I'm just coming, I'll keep this really brief because you are busy. I'm coming to speak to the accessibility component of tonight in the accessibility plan. I just wanted to say thank you to all of the staff, the council, mayor, and left turn, right turn for the accessibility plan. It's been a long time coming. When I was 23, I didn't know anything about accessibility, and then I ended up with a severe spinal cord injury, and I was released into a world that was not built for me and was not readily accessible to me or acceptable to me. 40 years later, we're finally seeing a place where this is going to become, like everything else, a lens that we're looking through things, and that the wheel won't have to be reinvented every time we change councils and staff. This will become something that we all work with together. I've never been a fan of the carrot or the stick. My carrot is well withered not used. The stick doesn't help anybody. I think this is a way through education and a willingness to learn and collaborate. We're all going to win from this. And again, I just really want to thank you guys for all the work you've put into this, for left turn, right turn, for the work they've done. And particularly, I'd like to thank Councillor O'Keefe for getting this going before we had to get it going. And again, thank you for all of you for your support in this.
Thank you, Ms. Frim. And thank you for serving on the Accessibility Advisory Committee and all the work you've done for the many years you've been working informally up to now. Okay, anybody else from the public who wishes to approach and make a comment? Okay, I will call for last time. Seeing nobody, I will close public participation. And I will move on to approval of the minutes from the previous regular Committee of the Whole meeting of October 17th.
So moved.
Okay, I got it moved.
Second.
And seconded. Call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. I will move on to our presentations. So this is from the CRD, and they're giving a presentation on the Regional Water Supply Development Cost Charge. So we have Laura Bernier and Patrick Stevens, if you wish to approach the podium. If you have a presentation online, I'm sure Anna will load it up for you in a moment. Oh, you got it.
Okay, great. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Stevens, and I'm a project engineer in the CRD's Water Supply Engineering and Planning Division. And with me tonight, also from the CRD, are Scott Mason and Alicia Fraser. We also have our consultant Urban Systems here tonight to help us present, with Laura Bernier and Samantha Bowen both in attendance. And thank you again for the opportunity to present tonight with the purpose of informing the Town of Sydney's Mayor and Council of the CRD's proposed Regional Water Supply Development Cost Charge Program. Now I'll keep this quick here with our 10-minute limit, but we've submitted a covering letter tonight from Alicia, and that's going to go over a lot of the supporting documents as well as the political groups, specifically the Regional Water Supply Commission and the CRD Board, which are overseeing and directing this project. Quick overview here of the regional water supply system. The regional water supply provides bulk drinking water to the municipalities and the First Nations in the Greater Victoria area. This includes the supply of water to the Saanich Peninsula water system, which in turn provides drinking water to the Town of Sydney. The primary water source is the Souk Lake Reservoir, and major components of the system include 3 watersheds, 15 dams, 2 tunnels, 2 disinfection facilities, and nearly 120 kilometers of transmission mains. We'll now have Urban Systems staff continue on with the presentation to provide background information, progress to date, and next steps. I'll hand it over to Laura now. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Wonderful. So yes, I will keep this brief and ensure that we are going over some of our DCC 101s and making sure everyone understands. However, we're open to questions about that at the end as well. So if there's anything that I've gone over a little too quickly, feel free to bring it up and we can dive a little bit deeper. On the agenda for today, we wanted to introduce the DCCs and provide a bit of an overview, as well as look over the current DCC rates that are applied throughout the Town of Sydney. And then we'll look at the proposed regional water supply system DCC, including the program development and policy considerations. After that, we'll look at how the program and rates were, after the program and rates were developed, we'll look at the rates themselves and open it up for any discussion and questions. So DCCs in a nutshell are legislated by the Local Government Act and are guided by the Best Practice Guide, and they are rates that are used to support growth. And so the infrastructure that's needed to support the costs of growth are then divided over the total population here. And so we won't be looking at any infrastructure that's required for like replacement or to replace aging infrastructure. Rather, we're really looking at the new capacity that's required to service a growing population. The philosophy behind them is really to foster fairness so that it's under a benefit or pay principle. So the idea is that growth pays for growth, and otherwise, if developers are not paying for growth, that burden would typically fall onto existing taxpayers. So the idea is that it's fostering a more fair distribution of those costs according to those that will benefit. They also ensure consistency. They minimize the financial risk to local governments, in this case the CRD, to ensure that there's adequate reserves in place so that infrastructure can be built and serviced. And they do ensure certainty for the development community. So there is a benefit here rather than having a negotiated approach to development. Developers know what they are going to be paying for as they enter the community and propose new developments and what rate they'll be paying. So as I previously mentioned, who pays for DCCs? Developers typically. So they will pay for DCCs at the time of subdivision or building permit application based on the types of units they're proposing and what land use categories they will be building. So the current DCC rates in Sydney are currently done according to services for the most part, and they span a couple of different areas. So I believe there's up to 10 areas depending on what service are provided. So you can see those rates on the left, and then on the right-hand side you'll see there are currently DCCs that are being charged for water and for wastewater. These rates here are applied by the CRD for the area for these services. So the program that we're going to be talking to you about tonight is separate from that program that I just overviewed there, and this is for the regional water supply. So this would be a new DCC in addition to these charges that are seen here. So the regional water supply rate is based on a couple of key inputs in terms of the program development. So in terms of growth, projection, and timelines, these are determined over a 30-year time horizon based on regional growth strategy information, consultation with staff, and other key inputs for the growth projections. They're also based on a number of technical documents that have been developed over time through the CRD. So projects within the 30-year time frame have been identified through capital planning and master planning, namely the Regional Water Supply 2022 Master Plan and the CRD RWS 2023 Capital Plan. They identify over $2 billion worth of infrastructure that are required over the next 30 years, much of which will be to service growth. Lastly, project benefit allocations are a key input into the program that are used to determine how much are existing taxpayers benefiting from this service or this infrastructure versus how many new developer and growth units will be benefiting from that same service. And this kind of just lays out in a little bit more detail how we've developed those. So you'll see the growth estimates, the capital costs, and the benefit factors are those gold inputs that are kind of the technical ones we've worked through with CRD staff. And then there's also policy decisions, which is at the CRD board level, which will be determined to see how much assistance will be provided to development through those rates. And I'll go into this assist factor in a little bit more detail in the next slides. So the growth rates are here up on the screen. Again, we did work with the Town of Sydney staff to review these, and these were determined based on regional growth strategies. And then the assist factor is another key input here. So typically with the assist factor, we'll see local governments are required to have an assist factor. They'll be between 1 and 99%. Typically, we see them between 1 and 10%. And as I mentioned, this will help us determine what is up to new growth to be, what is to be attributed to new growth versus what is the burden of existing taxpayers. And from there, this helps us really determine that regional water supply DCC program. So you'll see a number of projects that we've grouped here. There's 6 main groupings of projects that'll be required over the next 30 years for the program. And you can see the total program costs there at the bottom. So in total, these 6 groupings of projects lead to $1.4 billion worth of infrastructure, which we have kind of fed into this model here. And so I'll guide you to the next column here, which is the benefit to new versus existing development. That's that benefit allocation I talked about. So where you see it being 100%, these are projects, the Leach watershed, for instance, this is a project that will benefit new growth entirely. So if it weren't for growth in the region, this watershed wouldn't be required. Other projects are driven by wider population growth. So you'll see kind of 35%. There's the Souk Lake Reservoir. There are transmission mains, the water filtration plant. The Smith Hill storage tank is kind of a equal benefit to new versus existing growth. So from there, we get our total project costs with the CRD kind of responsibility versus the developer responsibility. So once we've kind of done all of that technical analysis, we've fed that in, we've looked at the growth estimates, we have determined that this would be kind of a single family, if you look at the first line, it would be about $9,000 in terms of a single family DCC. And that would be collected on a per lot basis. Then you'll see that as those units densify there, it's about $8,000 for a medium density multifamily unit and $5,000 for a high density multifamily unit. And then the commercial, industrial, and institutional uses are based on a per square meter basis. So that would be $34 a square meter, $17 a square meter, and $73.5 a square meter.
I'll just note we're at our 10 minutes now, so.
Okay, great. So this would be just in conjunction to the other DCCs that I've already presented, for a total of about $11.5 thousand for a low density unit. This was just an example taken from the current bylaw. We also have some community comparisons that we can go over. I won't spend too much time on this. If there's questions about it, we can field those. And this is just the last slide I'd like to ensure we get to. If no DCCs were implemented, we would see a over 3-fold increase to the bulk water supply rate. And this graph just demonstrates some of the cost impacts that would be felt if no DCCs were implemented. Okay. We have a quick timeline of the process here, which I'd be happy to elaborate on later. The other piece here is just that there would be a bit of a grace period for in-stream development. And I'll open it up to questions.
Great, thank you. I'll look to my colleagues to see if there are any questions. Okay, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bernier and Mr. Stevens, I believe it was, for your presentation, and thanks for the rest of the individuals for being here this evening. Just trying to get my head around clarification here. So numbers-wise, currently a developer would pay for say high-density multifamily. That's the example I looked at. They would pay $933 per unit. And so with the change, they would have to pay $6,000 per unit. Was that am I reading that right?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
It's on the slide you had. That one there, yeah.
Okay.
So high-density multifamily. A developer would currently pay $933 for the water and wastewater in DCCs per unit, and going forward under this draft, it would be $6,000 per unit. Would that be a correct understanding?
Yes. So
Getting
we
nods.
have the total here, the total combined for a single-family unit. We've just run a test scenario. It's a little bit of apples to oranges with the current DCC bylaw, but if that were to include the regional water supply, the waste and wastewater, and then I guess the key factor here is the municipal DCCs are under a different framework for how they'd be applied, so we wouldn't be able to calculate
Yeah,
that
no,
piece.
I'm just
But
looking
yes,
clearly
for-
at the CRD DCCs,
exactly.
and I'm getting nods from the people in behind.
So it would just be the high density
Yeah.
in terms of the municipal ones
Yeah,
wouldn't be included
I just
in
want to
that.
focus on that one, because I did just kind of a rough estimate. So if a developer was building a 40-unit building, by my calculations, that would be an extra $166,000 they would be paying in DCCs based on the numbers given here. Basically, more than a six-fold increase. And which leads me to one of my first questions is, given how this seems to have a pretty dramatic impact on the development community, I'm wondering, in the consultation phase, if any consideration was given to consulting and getting feedback with the development community sooner than where this process is laid out.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'd welcome any feedback that the CRD would like to give here. In my experience, typically, it is helpful to have values and rates to propose to developers before we consult them. So this would be that stage where we have developed some of the technical inputs around drafting a rate, and that allows them to provide some feedback and comments on those rates. So that would be a very traditional layout for how we would engage the development community. And yeah, open to whether there's anything additional there, but.
Yeah, and I can just add on that briefly. Might just change slide here. Oop. Back to this slide on our process for working through the rates. So we've been meeting with municipal staff across the region and now municipal mayors and council. We will be taking our initial feedback back to the Regional Water Supply Commission, who may provide us further direction on the program. At that point, we would then turn to our public and development community open houses and engagement.
Great, thank you. And I just have one last question, if I may, and it sort of builds off of this. So, sort of a preface to this is that Burnaby and Surrey were in line for getting Housing Accelerator Fund money, and Metro Vancouver decided they were going to triple their DCC rates, and so there's been a pause, and it's been extended. It's an extended pause. They still haven't received the funding. So my question is, and it's my concern is around the fact that we have an application in, and although we don't control particularly what your numbers here, I'm just concerned about how that might be viewed negatively by the Minister of Housing towards our application. There may be other municipalities in the CRD that are applying for this, given the large increase, and whether they'll say that as well, that's offsetting our GST cut on rental projects. So, and given that this money is really important for us in terms of creating affordable housing in the community, I wonder the CRD's perspective on, it's hard to parlay a question into this, but how do you view that in terms of how it might negatively impact us if they were to come out and say to us, look, we were going to provide you these funds, but now that we've seen this, we're not really sure if we're comfortable with it. So how would the CRD speak on our behalf, I guess, to the federal government in something like that? I know it's a tough question, but it's just.
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's one that's coming up a lot. There's a rich discussion behind this. However, the province supports DCCs. They're a legislated, regulated tool that have existed for a very long time in BC, and that they exist across Canada in many different forms under many different names. So this isn't necessarily a new concept. I will say the rates that are being proposed by the CRD are a different order of magnitude than those that are being seen in Metro Van. So that's one key consideration. Another one is that I will say whether affordability falls on the burden of existing taxpayers or developers. These are technical infrastructure costs that are required for water to be supplied. And so at the end of the day, it does come down to that. And I think that there are ongoing discussions around what DCCs are and how infrastructure will be paid for through the lens of the housing changes that we're currently seeing, but certainly accept that there's a very politicized discussion currently happening.
I think Laura covered almost every point that I was going to make, other than just to say that we are monitoring that situation and are keeping up to it, and certainly considering what we are presenting in the lens of what develops in that area. So.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So getting back to the point about, you know, developers paying for these, I guess at the end of the day, it's the person buying that building who is going to pay. The developer will hand in the money, but that's going to be recovered by whoever, the new homeowner or whoever is purchasing that building. And so I guess it's a concern for me that at a time when we're trying to boost housing, especially for, you know, that middle income that we talk about. And so what my understanding of how this works is that the same rate is applied no matter whether it's a 1-bedroom apartment or a 6-bedroom house on 2 acres of property. Is my understanding of that correct?
So the rates will vary by land use category. So a single family home with 6 bedrooms will pay a higher DCC rate than a high density apartment that's in a big building. So those land use categories will be different. The number of bedrooms in a single family home won't impact the type of rate you pay, however.
Yes.
Is that
Yeah,
helpful?
no, I understood that from the presentation. Yeah. I guess what I'm getting at is within, say, the single family category. So the province has come out with new legislation where apparently I can build perhaps 4 new single family dwellings on my little 3,000 square foot lot. And so, you know, those might be 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom small units. And so those are going to be tiny little lots and maybe with, you know, a couple of bathrooms, as opposed to something in another area. It's still a single family lot, but it's got 6 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms and using a lot more water. So are there other models of applying these sorts of development cost charges so that they're related to the potential use of that property? Otherwise, you've got somebody, a new homeowner, a young person buying a 2 or 3 bedroom unit that is paying the same amount into the infrastructure as somebody who's got a 6-bedroom house.
Mm-hmm. No, these are great points, and I might just bring up the land use categories here to support the discussion. So it's a really astute comment. Obviously, there's been some changes to what can be built on a single family home that are raising some questions around those low density residential uses. So in the low density category now, we would consider and think about how secondary suites might be distributed across the CRD as these new housing changes apply. If there were to be 4 units on a single family lot, that would not be a single family DCC charge. There would likely be an additional rate that would be applied, for instance, for an apartment suite or a high density multifamily suite that we would see as added on to that single family home. So you wouldn't have, let's say, 4 units on a single family lot that would be paying a single family home unit. They would pay the single family unit plus 3 high density unit rates. So you would see additional collection for more units on a lot. Does that help answer the question?
No, that doesn't make sense to me, but I guess my point is I guess my input would be if you're looking for things is that I'd be looking for there to be a more equitable way to apply the rates so that someone on a small single family lot would not be paying the same as a larger unit. And
right.
Even with, say, in a multifamily apartment, so there's quite a range there as well. So somebody wanting to get into the housing market and buying a bachelor unit or a 1-bedroom unit is going to pay the same, as I understand it, as a 3-bedroom unit. So just wondering, you know, I guess my suggestion would be to be looking at options to make it more equitable.
Absolutely, yeah, well received, and you know, these unit categories are based on kind of these equivalency factors that we use to see the
Yep.
impact on infrastructure, and there are models that do use how many bathrooms per unit, and will kind of count how many installations of faucets do you have per each land use category, and that is a model that can be used. It's one that's very administratively burdensome, and a little bit more, and it's difficult to update and to have the flexibility through that system, but it is a framework that this is an opportunity for feedback, so certainly welcome that.
Thank you. My other question is about the, so the way I'm understanding it is that growth projections are made for 30 years. And then based on the anticipated growth, say in the town of Sydney, and how that, the costs, the future costs have to be allocated. So it seems to me, am I understanding it correctly? If our growth rate is underestimated, or if it's too low, then would we be overcharging? So say if we think there's, I don't know, say going to be 1,000, just for sake of argument, 1,000 new properties come into the town over the period, but it's actually 2,000. So we would be collecting more than we anticipated. And wondering how that kind of surplus gets handled.
Absolutely. If you were to receive more growth than you expected, you would collect more DCCs than might be required for the infrastructure on your project lists. However, you might argue that you know, those new units would also impact infrastructure, and so those reserves could be carried over to support future updates and projects that are required to support that growth through the infrastructure they would also need to maintain certain levels of service.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sorry, maybe it was in the information, but is there provision to be looking at reviewing those growth rates like every 5 years or something? Okay.
So
Okay,
DCCs can be updated annually with inflation, and there can be minor updates from 1 to 3 years, or you would have major DCC updates from 3 to 5 years, and you would likely update your projects, your cost rates through that process, as well as potentially your growth estimates and any other input in the DCC program. So it would be
Okay.
typical to update on a 5-year basis.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And just one more, I think. In regards to, so is this something that requires a resolution from council? I know it's CRD, but is this something that we would give guidance to whoever our representative is on that, or just wondering how the governance of that works?
Yeah, and I'm not sure who amongst this council would be on the RWS commission.
It's me.
Oh, okay.
So,
Steve, I believe, is the alternate.
so any policy decisions would be made through the RWS commission, and that could be brought forward by each of the communities that are part of the CRD.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yeah, Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. If we could go to the growth slide, 30-year growth estimates, please, for just a moment. I appreciate the explanation of how those were arrived at when the slide was introduced. But the regional, I think the 30 years goes beyond the regional growth strategy. And I'm just wondering if a little bit more detail could be provided on how they were arrived at for the residential. And I'm interested in the industrial, commercial, and institutional, because Sydney is pretty much built out in commercial, institutional, and industrial. And I noted in the presentation and in the slides that the DCCs are really applying to new development, not redevelopment. And last question associated with that is the VAA is removed. If that can be explained, please.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, this regional growth strategy likely, these growth estimates are longer than the regional growth strategy. However, so what we would have done would be to extrapolate those units out for the additional years that are required. My colleague Sean was involved in the development of the growth estimates, and we can certainly go back and review any questions that council has about these growth estimates. But what we did was to extrapolate any growth estimates to that time horizon and consult with staff around whether they were likely to occur. So that would be how these were developed, and I'm happy to go back and provide additional information on the growth estimates if that's of interest. The second question was around VAA. VAA has been included. Has been excluded in both the growth estimates as well as the DCC charge. And the question was as to clarifying that, or
Just
more
why they're removed?
Why? So the airport authority is not required to pay DCCs at this moment, and so there will be a need to do further discussion and understanding of what charges have been paid through VAA in the past to better understand that component. But VAA is not currently required to pay DCCs at the moment, so that's why they've been excluded from the.
Thank you. In the last 5 years, we've had 4 large projects, significant projects on VA lands in Sydney. 8 acres, 3.5 acres, 3.5 acres and 4 acres, I think, or 2.5 acres. Many hundreds of thousands of square feet. And so the airport, as we know, the VAA is leasing these lands long-term to their tenants who are then building. In these 4 cases, and in additional cases that could come, or opportunities that could come forward in future years, these are undeveloped lands. And so it wouldn't actually be the airport authority paying the DCCs; it would be the tenants or the applicants on the VA lands.
But these would be on the VAA lands. There might just be a question around, who the leaseholder. I'm not exactly sure what the governance structure of that is. If they are the VAA lands, I don't believe that they would be paying DCCs. However, I'm open to looking into that a little further and providing information to council if that's of interest.
That would be
Yeah.
helpful. Again, I'd like to thank you for touching again on the residential calculation or future units extrapolation, but commercial 110,000 square meters is over 300,000 square feet, and except for VA lands in Sydney, I'm not sure where 300,000 square feet of new commercial would be located in Sydney. Same with institutional and industrial. So
we can certainly look into that and ensure that whichever we'll clarify which lands have been included in those calculations and provide that clarity. Absolutely.
Thank you. My next question is regarding the assistance factor. It's really just a quick clarification that it's calculated at 1%, or sorry, in this structure it's 1%, but it's going to come through the regional growth, or sorry, it's going to come through the regional water rates. So in essence, that's a general tax on the general population that's contributing to this. Is that a way to view it?
It would be by the rate payers.
Right.
So rate payers would be contributing towards the municipal assist factor. Yes.
Okay. Could you bring up the community comparison slide, please?
Yep.
Actually, while you're just looking for that, Ms. Verhagen, did you have a comment about the VAA?
Just a comment of clarification, thank you. Just to say that development cost charges, as was indicated in the presentation, are collected at the time of building permit. The town of Sydney nor the district of North Saanich, we don't issue building permits for work on VAA lands. They issue their own building permits. So that's, we don't have an opportunity to collect because they do that permitting process in-house.
Thank you. So in terms of the slide, it's either the slide before or after this, that brings out the calculation of 11,500 total for Sydney with the new 9,000 for the proposed RWS. Is that 11,500 number comparable in that next slide? Or the slide on the...
So,
I mean, these take into account the different DCs that each of those municipalities have, And this calculation of 11.5 is taking into account all of the different DCCs that would be applied. So
The calculation that you're seeing here is it is an example of a low-density, single-family home that was extrapolated and identified through the bylaw. You could compare reasonably that rate here. However, the municipal rate will widely vary depending on the service and area of Sydney that you would be looking to apply DCCs to. So there is a range of that $726 that could increase quite drastically if you were in a zone, for instance, where a drainage DCC was provided. There's a $2,500 drainage DCC that applies to a specific zone. So there is quite a range that could be applied to that $700 column. So that could expand or retract the total DCC payable. So it is difficult to compare when factoring in the town of Sydney's current DCC rate with other DCC rates across the province.
And that variability is not necessarily the case with the others in your comparative community comparisons?
No, it would not. So most of the communities here, none of the communities here have area-specific charges. The town of Sydney has over 10 area-specific charges for their DCCs, so there's a much higher variability in the DCC charge that could be applied to any one of the land use categories that we saw earlier.
Okay, so I was going to perhaps request, perhaps when it goes to the CRD board or the Regional Water Commission, that a community comparisons chart include all of the municipalities in the CRD, but you're indicating that that would be difficult for Sydney, for example, because of our variability.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. There is, it is described in the slides and in your presentation with regards to grants, and that will be reviewed when it's reviewed 5 years from now. But is there not precedence for grants being received for DCC eligible projects now that could have been factored in, or was there a factor put into that, into this calculation?
Grants can be included in DCC charges. Grants must be in hand during the time of the program development to be included in the DCC charge, and they must be included. So if there is a grant for a water treatment plant, for instance, you would include that grant in the water program, and it would be factored in the DCCs.
Thank you. My last question is the $9,044 that comes up in the previous slide. That's going to be the same number throughout the CRD, throughout the 13 municipalities?
Yes. All 13 municipalities will have the same DCC rate, as this is regional water supply, so it will serve the greater CRD area equally.
Thank you again for the presentation, taking your questions.
Thank you. Oh, yep, Councillor Novak, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. I really only have one question, and that is, when was the last time these DCC rates were set?
For the CRD?
Yes, the rates that we're looking at now that we see as being fairly high, when was the last time that they were set?
So this is a new DCC bylaw that is being proposed. So it has not, there was never a previous DCC bylaw. There are existing water and wastewater DCC rates. However, the regional water supply has never had a bylaw. There is some history to that I might invite Patrick or Scott to speak to here.
There was a DCC bylaw briefly explored in the 90s for the regional water supply, although that did not go through. We maybe don't know the full history, but at that time the bylaw was not adopted. And the Saanich Peninsula water and wastewater rates that you see up here, those were last set in 2018 and are due for their five-year review here.
Okay, so these rates replace what you just spoke of, bylaw?
The regional water supply DCC here that's proposed and we're presenting on tonight, there is no existing bylaw for that DCC program.
So So these rates were never paid before by developers?
No, this is a new program being proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor O'Keefe for a second time.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the 30-year growth estimates again, to see if I understand that correctly. So the residential units, so is that the total number of units that we expect to have over the next 30 years?
It is.
So I think it adds up to about 1,849 units. So divided by 30 years, I think comes to about 61 units. So the projection is that we don't anticipate more than 61 new units every year in Sydney.
Currently, that's what we've considered.
Okay, so I guess my suggestion would be, I find that really low. And I guess what I'm thinking now is, I presume that's been based on past growth in Sydney, which is about half the growth rate of the rest of the CRD. And, you know, if you don't build it, they won't come. If you build it, they will come. And so with the new legislation coming from the province to allow more densification, I think there's high likelihood that we'll see greater growth than perhaps we may have seen in the past because of our ability to do these sort of things. So I guess my suggestion would be, I would hope that you'd be taking another look at those growth projections and recalculating, because again, I'm worried about having a calculation that's based on a low number of units coming in, because that means we're going to be charging people more than they have to. So that would be my point and suggestion, to take that into account before this gets finalized.
Certainly, thank you for that
Thanks.
feedback. And the growth estimates are being conducted over the CRD as a whole, and so those have been distributed between the communities based on kind of complete growth projections for the CRD as a region as well. So we can take a look at how those have been divided across the communities. I will note that it is customary, in order to ensure that there is no financial risks to the CRD with respect to collecting enough for infrastructure needs. The growth rates will be conservatively low to ensure that those DCC rates are collected, and so these will be perhaps a little different than the rates you might see in target housing projections from some plans. So it is worth noting that it's not to say that the growth rates are measured differently. However, we need to make sure that we're ensuring financial stewardship and that there's enough collection that does happen over those 30 years.
Yep.
So that's one consideration as well.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. No speakers for a second time? Great. I'll thank you for your presentation, and look forward to hearing from you in the next go-around of consultation.
Thank you.
I will move on to our new 6B, which is a presentation from, Kara Wilkie and Haley Janelle McConnell.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Just going to pull up that presentation. Give me one brief moment. Yeah, so good evening, and thank you very much for changing your agenda to enable us to call it an evening slightly earlier, given as the 3-hour time difference is certainly getting late into the evening here. We appreciate that. So we are here to present the draft accessibility plan that has been developed for Sydney. As we noted, I'm Kara Wilkie. I'm the principal of the accessibility consulting practice with Left Turn, Right Turn, or LTRT. And we've been supporting organizations across the country to do accessibility planning and to chart a path forward towards improved accessibility. And Haley Guino McConnell is my colleague, and she has a background in accessibility planning and public engagement and a PhD in disability and history. And so we are joined with others as part of the team, but are here to present to you today. Our plan is to briefly overview the project's objective and process. We will walk through some of the key highlights of the project and its findings before turning to some of the actions that are committed to in the draft accessibility plan. Because of the time constraints, we're intending to just do that through a quick synopsis, and then of course to open this up for your opportunity for any questions or further discussion. So our project objectives were to develop 3 separate accessibility plans for North Saanich, Central Saanich, and Sydney. And we wanted those to be plans that reflect the needs and priorities of both each individual community as well as the Saanich Peninsula community more broadly. But they also needed to be specific to each municipality and inform one another with the objective of creating a cohesive approach across the peninsula to the extent possible. We were also looking to meet the legislative requirements under the Accessible British Columbia Act, which is the new legislation that is driving the development of this plan. And of course, to provide a pragmatic and principled approach to those municipalities to improve accessibility. So this will be Sydney's first 3-year plan, but it will not be your last. The vision of the Accessible BC Act is one of ongoing improvements rather than one plan that's going to achieve everything. It's worth noting at this point that the drafts of the other municipalities look very similar and are structured very similar to this. Some of the actions differ between the municipalities, but they are all very similar. North Saanich's council has endorsed that draft plan, and Central Saanich has not yet considered their plan. So I'm going to briefly go through our methodology, the areas of focus before turning to those commitments. We focused on the relevant areas that are outlined in the legislation, as well as some additional areas that have been identified by SPAC, the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. These are employment, the delivery of services, built environment, information and communications, transportation, procurement, raising community awareness, and community communication and engagement. There are other areas within the legislation, but they're not of relevance to the municipal operations, and so we were not considering them. We then, in order to identify the opportunities and develop actions in the plan, we engaged with SPAC through a survey and at 2 separate meetings. We engaged with residents of the 3 different municipalities through an online survey, through community pop-ups, and a town hall. We leveraged the knowledge and engagement that had been previously completed through the age-friendly plans development. And we reviewed documents and best practices from the municipalities to inform kind of what was already the knowledge and understanding of both challenges for people with disabilities as well as opportunities for improvement. We engaged staff in roundtables as well, and staff were critical in informing the final framing of the current plan that's before you. So just want to walk through some key highlights of our various activities. So we did throughout these see large alignment in the approaches of the 3 different municipalities, and noted that there's lots of opportunity to adopt a cohesive cross-peninsula approach while also recognizing the individual needs of each municipality. We did note that staff are in need of some additional training and capacity building to be able to have the skills and knowledge to incorporate accessibility into their work, and that's built into the plan. We also heard from SPAC some key priorities that included the core objective of having people with disabilities, giving them the ability to participate fully in all aspects of community life. And they also were speaking to the desire to have people who have the ability to make change listen to the lived experience of people with disabilities. I'm also going to walk briefly through the core themes that we heard through public engagements, and those were that residents both advocated for change and more accessibility in theory, but were somewhat unsure of what that would look like in practice. Residents with disabilities were invested in changes that would impact their daily living, and they were interested in more usable public spaces, more independence when going about their daily lives. Residents with disabilities expressed a desire for increased accessibilities of roadways in particular. There was a lot of interest in intersections and crosswalks. We also heard many residents with disabilities speaking about how they were able to get along in their daily lives reasonably well, but were experiencing barriers accessing public places, so beaches and parks and other forms of recreation and community gathering being key areas of their interest and commentary. So we're going to turn to a brief highlights of the draft plan. I'm not going to go through every of the commitments, but we'll go through each of the main categories. I do want to just note before I do that, that the vision of this plan is systemic improvements for the future. So embedding accessibility into the considerations and the activities of the municipality going forward. It's much preferable and cheaper to avoid creating barriers than it is to remove them after they've been created. And as a result, the commitments that you'll see on here are about broad and about building that into processes and considerations rather than a specific set of sidewalks or buildings that need to be improved. It's a broad direction setting plan rather than very specific. So turning to those specific actions that are in here. So the first section that you'll see is around employment. And these relate to the town as an employer rather than broader employment within the municipality. And here the actions include improving accommodations processes. So that means improving how the town responds to the specific needs of individual employees with disabilities, as well as considering how recruitment and hiring processes can be more accessible and increasing awareness of accessibility through training and knowledge sharing. The next section is about services, and so these are the services that are delivered by the municipality, and these actions aim to make improvements to residents' ability to access and participate in municipal services, including events. There is a separate section that is specific to emergency services, and these actions aim to build capacity of emergency personnel to notify, respond to, and help people with disabilities in emergency situations. It also includes individual and community awareness on what to do in an emergency where accessibility needs are a factor. The section on information and communications has actions that are aimed to improve the municipality's knowledge around and ability to create accessible documents and information channels, and it includes improving the public's ability to access important municipal information. There's a section on transportation, which relate to prioritizing accessibility at the earliest stages of transportation projects and consulting people with disabilities early and often. This is, as I said before, one of SPAC's priorities. It's also something that frequently comes up in this work across the disability community about the desire to be have their voices heard early in the development, which is also beneficial to prevent challenges from occurring and being created. The section on buildings, infrastructure, and public spaces has some standards about setting, or actions about setting standards and building capacity for new projects and planned renovations. So as I mentioned, it's not about specific changes, but about thinking about accessibility when planning those projects. There is also some actions around refining and making more cohesive some of bylaws across the municipalities, and ensuring that people with disabilities can use public spaces comfortably by planning for things like improved signage, availability of public benches, and accessible washrooms. The second to last section is around public engagement and public awareness, and it's about ensuring that residents are aware of the importance of accessibility and that they understand what accessibility means. It also speaks to ensuring that engagement methods are designed to be inclusive of all people living in the municipality. And then, as I mentioned, the final section is procurement, and this is not about procuring a specific accessible item, but about embedding accessibility considerations into the procurement process. So thinking about how does accessibility relate to any particular purchase before committing to that. It may well be in some circumstances that other needs or take precedence and there is no particular accessible alternative, but to do that intentionally and knowingly, and to be building that into your processes. That ends my intended commentary, and so we're happy to either open it up for your discussion or answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. That was amazing, perfect time. I will open the floor up to questions from my colleagues on that presentation or anything that they've seen in the plan so far. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Wilkie, for your presentation, and Ms. McConnell, hopefully getting it right, for being here to answer questions as well. I'd just like to thank you and Left Turn Right Turn for your work on the project and for our staff as well, and also to SPAC, in particular the community members whose feedback and insight is incredibly valuable when you create a document like this. The one question I have is with regards to the survey, and you mentioned it's a small sample size in there of 79. I wonder if you might be able to, if you have any reasons why the sample size was so small, and if you could, was there anything you would do differently to try and possibly get a bigger sample size if you were to do it again?
Yeah, I think there's several contributing factors. One is that there have been other engagement around the age-friendly initiatives, that many people would have already engaged with that, particularly seniors communities often don't identify with the language of disability, despite the fact that I would say that many of them would be experiencing a disability, and so would be relevant here, but not necessarily seeing that language, which is why we leverage the other engagements and the information from that in the plan. Other factors were, say candidly, that we did have a legal deadline that has passed, and so we're doing engagements over the summer, which is often a harder time to be able to get meaningful feedback or to be able to do that. I would say, though, that we did get, while the numbers themselves aren't a very high response rate, we did have meaningful conversations in all of those engagements, and so are confident that this is giving you a good roadmap. I think I would be less confident in it if we were telling you a specific sidewalk to fix based off of those, rather than it being a roadmap about both strategic and systemic improvements.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the report. As you may recall, I was the council member on SPAC, and my recollection is that the committee members received this very well and were impressed with how well the report was laid out. One thing I was wondering about was there's really excellent actions in here, and the next part is implementation. And I know that you've done lots of these plans for other municipalities and organizations across the country. And so I wonder if you have suggestions or examples of what is normally a next step. So there's, as I say, some of the things are maybe staff things. I don't know if you see accessibility committees that get involved in some of these things. So if you have any comment or suggestions in that regard.
I would say that some of that is about the knowledge building and capacity building that we were noting as a need of one of those key themes at the beginning. That is quite common, that when we're seeing, and it's that legislation like the Accessible BC Act is starting a conversation, is triggering this development and planning, but isn't the end of that conversation. And so I would certainly say, and that we don't want to be just doing these kinds of improvements for a legislative purpose rather than making meaningful change. And so I think what I would suggest as the next step is that ongoing conversation about capacity building and meaningfully having conversations with the community, doing that ongoing engagement, and that staff are going to continue to need to build their knowledge and their capacity to think about accessibility in all of their activities, because it's relevant to nearly everything. I think Haley may also have something to add to this question.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for welcoming us tonight. One of the things that I'm really encouraged by is that a lot of the features of this draft plan actually align with other plans that are active or being considered in the town of Sydney right now. So some of the elements of your active transportation plan, parks master plans, things like that, official community plans do include things that dovetail with the recommendations here. So in terms of implementation, I would encourage, the municipality to look at where those alignments are, consider the resources that have already been dedicated to those other plans, and then leverage that. I think that's a really good place to start, because there is that sort of already that buy-in, that political will, that capacity, and maybe some resourcing that's already been devoted to other plans. And I think that would be the first place that I would recommend starting.
Thank you. That all makes sense. I guess what I was wondering more specifically is when other organizations that you've done this for, when they look at these plans, and so there's not say a time frame or a priority set. So do they normally get together as a group and go through it and say and identify priorities and set time frames, knowing that this is something that has to be actioned over the next 3 years?
So I would say after a typical public plan of this nature gets developed, there is often the internal assignment of responsibility and work planning and budgeting that's happening. I understand that these are going to be incorporated into future budget planning that will come to council at that point in time around any actioning that needs to happen. And so it is at that stage of assigning responsibility to make sure that things actually take place. That I think often more specific timelines, responsibilities, and resourcing starts to be attributed to things.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you. Did we have further questions? Okay, and not at this time. Thank you. I just actually, I wanted to comment that as well. I was quite happy with seeing this plan and the stress that was put on changing them, helping staff change their mindset so that it's not something that they're constantly having to go through a checklist or have to go out again, that it just becomes something they naturally think of. And I like the guiding criteria. And one of the questions I had, because I see that there's just a lot of potential for, I guess, would be unintended benefits when I'm looking at where the town has, changes to communication so that it's a more accessible reading level, because the primary disabilities really that we'd be dealing with are people with cognitive impairments a lot of the time, or learning disabilities, but also things like English as a second language is going to benefit if it's a simpler style. And so I'm wondering, what are the guiding criteria for knowing how to write documents to what reading level? When I was a consultant, we were told to write things to a grade 12, and it was, as this report points out, impossible for some of it. So what documents need to have that additional work to put in, say, a summary, and what things have to be kind of globally changed if they can be, and how do we decide and know when we'd be meeting an accessible, kind of like being able to say, yes, now it's accessible and people can understand what we're doing? Is there guidelines for that?
I think you've asked $1 million question. In part because there's not a finish line, and that if this is going to be a constant area of improvement, we've got a number of federal regulatory bodies that are constantly, much like your bylaws as a municipality, are innately going to be inaccessible because they are incredibly legalistic and challenging for people to read and understand. And so the challenge is I challenge all of ourselves to write things as plainly as we can, and constantly I would suggest moving that benchmark as to what that actually means. But at the same time, prioritizing those documents which are most critical for people to be able to meaningfully engage with and understand. And that might mean for some that there's 2 different versions of a document if you need to have something that's very complicated for a particular audience, but it also is very accessible for others. And so whether that's, kind of public engagement, community recreation, election processes, things that might be incredibly of broad interest and need for people to be able to access. Haley, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, in terms of prioritization of kind of what gets looked at first and maybe what's most critical in terms of improving document accessibility and plain language. We did speak with emergency services personnel across the 3 municipalities, and so one of the areas that they were really keen to improve was in emergency notifications. So you think of things like, you know, extreme weather event, please evacuate, etc. I mean, those are sort of large words. What does that actually mean? And so that was an area that was identified as sort of safety critical. So ensuring that residents understand what is happening and what do I do. That's very action oriented, and misunderstandings there would be, you know, the impacts are much higher. And we did get to speak with some communication staff, and things that they immediately identified were public-facing things that are really about interfacing and interacting with the town. So social media feeds, your community newsletter, things like that were documents where it was like you're speaking to the residents. So I think those are good areas to start as well. They're also good areas, if I may say, to practice and flex that skill, because, you know, that's content that's generated frequently, tends to be less legalistic, tends to be less formal, and so it's a good space to figure out what that tone is and what that balance of being accurate but also approachable for the community. It's probably stuff that your community engages with more too. They may respond to a Facebook post or something on Twitter. You can engage if somebody is understanding it and if it's meeting the community needs. And then, as Kara says, you know, to kind of gauge beyond that, things that are a bit more official or dense, where does that fine line lie between adhering to, you know, public policy or legal frameworks and what have you. But just feedback from staff members that we talked to, areas that they were really asking us for feedback about and eager to improve on and start taking those steps with. It was around kind of emergency notifications and the more social elements of how you communicate with your residents, like social media and the newsletter.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds like the smart place to start, and that it would be probably something some years from now, after getting a handle on it, the staff might want their internal policy document for themselves about when we would do that additional summary, but that would be kind of an overwhelming task to start with now, so thank you. Are there any further questions for a second time arising from that? Well, thank you for your time, and especially at this late hour, and we'll be discussing, I think, your report later on the agenda, but have no further questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will now move on to, I'm sorry? A recommendation, oh, I'm so sorry. No, there's no recommendation. Just, that was just a presentation. The recommendation is on the report later when we will receive the staff report for 8A. Yeah, sorry, thank you. At this time, we are moving on to another presentation. We will get the presentation for Development Variance Permit Application for Seaport Place, number DV 100347 at 9881 Seaport Place. And we have, let's see, it's not John Shields, it is Jody Twa. Ah,
Hi.
thank you, you're in person.
Yeah,
So,
I'm here.
Go ahead.
Thanks to Mayor and Council for hearing for our variance to the Sign Bylaw. My name is Jody Twa, and I'll be the owner and operator of the new restaurant in Sydney. I'd like to start by saying I'm extremely excited about the relocation of our restaurant to your community. It's wonderful. It's incredible. So I don't think this will take as long as the other presentations. You have a staff report before you, which I've reviewed, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have or recommendations you might have for us.
All right, thank you. I will, we'll move on. We have, I'm sorry, public participation before we have the committee Q&A opportunity.
Okay.
So I will look to the public to see if there are any comments or questions for the applicant on this application. Okay, seeing none, then I will move on to the committee's Q&A and see if committee has any questions for the applicant. I think we will do maybe questions for staff after we do our after we receive the staff reports. Go ahead, Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chua, for being here and to answering questions. Just two really short questions. I noticed on the back of or the north side of the building facing the marina, there is a sign that says pub and restaurant, children welcome. I know it's from the previous restaurant. Are you planning on signage on the back side of the building as well?
Well, when our consultants talked about signs, that sign, I thought that we could freshen it, just paint it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. So I didn't think it was required, as I just thought we would leave that on the building. Just a nice new coat of paint, and that's it.
Fair enough, thank you. And the only other question I really have when I've gone there in the day and the night to see what it would look like. So the J, I have to ask, is the reason for the J, is that like a signature logo of your enterprise, or?
Well, what happened was when we did the redesign of the front, we added some screenage, and you were probably way more aware of what it used to look like because I was only there a number of times. But adding the screenage, I think, was a positive from the public perspective because it kind of hides the entrance and exit of our supplies. Yeah. And so it left a pretty long kind of boardage in front. So the J, it's a similar material to the wood, but it just kind of broke up a very long section. So like when I read the staff report and your sign bylaw, I see that, you know, it exceeds the amount of signs. And so I even thought, after looking at it and then going down there, the word restaurant, again, it's really nice because it breaks up the long wall. But in reality, there's two car spots right in front of it. So from a practical perspective, you're not really going to see that signage on most times because those spots are, I'm going to guess, probably the most used spots on the parking lot. And so if one of the signs wasn't acceptable to the city, certainly we could remove one of those. It was just mostly for aesthetics of the front of the building is why they were put there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mayor McNeil-Smith, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that was actually my only question was, given the parking spaces that are there and vehicles will likely be right in front of the sign, why you're not locating it a little higher on that face of the building?
It's a very low ceiling already, so we could move it up slightly, but it still will be impacted quite a bit by the parked cars. But there was a lot of consideration to how the building will look, and we're really excited to try to make it a fresh look. Yeah, so it was just aesthetics. It was really, and kind of centering it on that wall from the perspective of the consultants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yeah, Councillor Rintoul, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming forward this evening. The only sign that's illuminated, I believe, is the one, the highest elevated one, the Jacks on the Water. So the other two, with respect to the questions that were just asked, they're not illuminated. They're just, as you point out, trying to address maybe a lot of wall space there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The roof sign is actually something that when we took a look, when you stand up at the top of the parking lot, you can actually identify it. So it kind of tells everyone kind of it's a restaurant, and there was a sign that was elevated there before as well. So it wasn't like it was a new sign for us, but there was a sign up high there at the old restaurant as well.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your time, Mr. Twa. Now, we did have a staff report that accompanied this. I don't know if staff wanted to add anything to this that was discussed just now by the applicant, by the questions that followed.
No, thank you. I think it's all contained in the report.
All right, now there's a recommendation here. I'll look for a motion. Councillor Rintoul, go ahead.
Thank you. Move the recommendation that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 9881 Seaport Place be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV1001000347 to vary the requirements for the number of fascia signs permitted on one building face, the maximum distance from the ground for a fascia sign, and the maximum height for a fascia sign in order to allow 2 fascia signs, and to vary the type of signs permitted in order to allow a roof sign, and that any written correspondence received before to the council at the time of consideration approval of the variance.
Point of order, just a correction on that is DV 100347, that extra 100 should not be in there.
Thank you. Thank you for catching that.
And I will second.
Okay, we have moved in second. I'll call the question. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Discussion. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and a question through you to staff. And I'm just, as Councillor Mantua read the motion, taking note of it at this time, and apologize for not seeing it earlier and asking the question of staff before the meeting. But it says that owners and tenants in occupation within 246 feet, which I relate to better than 75 meters. This property is kind of uniquely placed in Seaport Place. It's right in a corner. And there's only a few businesses that are immediately adjacent to it. The residences at the pier and the residences on Seaport West, I don't know if they're 245 feet away or more. And I'll turn to staff.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Through the chair to the mayor, the measurement for the radius notification is taken from the property lines, not from the building location on the property. So the property itself, the lot lines, if you're familiar with the property, go to the south side of Victoria Distillery, right out west to Seaport Place, and north to above the Surly Mermaid. So the property itself is much larger than just the square under the footprint of this restaurant.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good clarification. Any further questions on that or further discussion? No? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Long. Right, 7B, we'll go to the zoning amendment application number RZ 100109 and development permit application number DV 100347. And this is for 9522 Lochside Drive. You see the wrong address immediately above it in the agenda here, but it's to permit a mixed-use residential commercial development consisting of 48 townhouses, 49 apartment dwellings, 140.56 square meters of commercial space and underground parking. And we have presenters Jordan Milne and I believe Richard Gill is calling in. Jordan Milne here in person.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your consideration this evening of our application. I'm Jordan Milne, President and CEO of GMC Projects. I'm joined this evening virtually by my colleague Richard Gill, as well by architects Ricardo Rego and Mark Blackwell from Acoustics Architecture, who are virtual, and as well Joe Zhu, who's landscape architect with Acoustics Architecture, and Andy Kading, who is the traffic consultant from Watts. I recognize the level of scale of our application may render the ability for us to complete this presentation in 10 minutes to be nearly impossible, but we will do our best. And in the event we're unable to conclude our presentation in 10 minutes, we respectfully ask if council would give us the benefit of some additional time so as to best inform the public for their participation and as well yourselves for question and answer period.
Go ahead.
Thank you. With that in mind, I'll move that the presentation be extended.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question on that extension, 15 minutes. Okay, opposed? Nope. Okay, all in favor, go ahead, you have 15 minutes.
Excellent, thank you in advance for your consideration. So today we're talking about the Cedarwood Motel and Suites, 9522 Lochside Drive. Familiar with this slide. Today's presentation will cover a series of items as are outlined on the screen here. Next slide, Richard. So for the benefit of everyone probably familiar with the OCP map that was recently adopted as of last year for the said property, it's divided into two OCP designations, being neighborhood townhouse and neighborhood commercial. This will come up a little bit later as we get to an overlay of the property where we have taken the liberty of adding townhouse form adjacent to or effectively within the neighborhood commercial to ensure in a compatible form opposite to single family homes on Weiler. We have been engaging with our neighbors through direct door knocking and through multiple of public open houses for several years, including during the OCP process, which some of you may be familiar with. This is a photograph that was taken in May of this year for a public engagement process that we did at the Peace Lutheran Church, and received some terrific feedback from some of our immediate neighbors, appreciation for the changes that had been made since the prior concept in the fall of 2021, but still some consistent commentary that has remained, and that is is related to existing traffic safety that is an existing issue on the intersection of Weiler and Lochside, the vehicle speeds, the way that vehicles drive down Weiler, the commercial space. I know one of our immediate neighbors who's quite vocal about the amount of commercial in the project is here with us this evening, and we have heard from everybody that we have engaged with that is our immediate neighbors and all those who participated in our survey that they're not looking for additional commercial beyond what has been proposed. And what we are proposing is a neighborhood service commercial for a bakery, cafe, possibly a neighborhood grocery style business, something that might be familiar in a Vancouver context to Finch's Market or Delina Cafe. We as well have heard about concerns around hedge retention, and just for your benefit, we are intending on retaining all of the hedge with the exception of the part that is along Weiler, as we will now have residential townhomes facing single-family residential, so a front door to front door relationship, as opposed to the current hedge which protects the visual appearance of the backside of the existing motel. As well, in terms of parking, how much parking are we providing? We are providing more parking than the parking bylaw requires, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. And as well, boat parking. What will happen with the boat parking? That is ultimately not a decision for us. We believe that the boat parking that is currently located adjacent to the property on Weiler would not be as suitable and appropriate to be there when we have front door relationships of residential, but ultimately that is not a decision that we make. So here is a graphic of some building outlines, and what I want to point out is the red structures are the existing structures that exist on the property. The green structures are the proposed new structures, and the red line that you see that jogs, that is the proposal of where we would effectively split the property from the neighborhood commercial into the townhouse use. The blue line that runs straight up, that is indicative of the OCP designation. So we are actually taking an area that would otherwise, under the OCP, allow for the neighborhood commercial up to 3-story form, and we are choosing to extend townhouses in that area. The reason being that that means we have townhouses opposite all of the single-family neighbors across the street, and what we do is we shift the 3-story neighborhood commercial to being adjacent to the blue waters, so that we have 3-story relationship to 3-story relationship, and we have a more traditional front door residential relationship as it relates to that traditional front door relationship. I also note that we have shifted the proposed neighborhood commercial mixed-use building further away from our southern property line than the existing building is, in order to create a bigger buffer between the proposed new building and the existing single-family neighbors to the south. And so that's a representation here as well. Our setbacks, we wanted to show to the setbacks to the neighbors at the rear that we would be providing increased setbacks beyond what exists from some of our neighbors, where we have 4.6 meters and 4.5 meters, where those existing setbacks from their homes to the property line are 4.3. And as mentioned, we would be retaining that hedge. Here is an overlay of the site plan, and to give some context, there's 2 access points along Weiler, one for the mixed-use commercial at the closest point on the southerly area, which provides as well for some commercial loading and practical access as it relates to deliveries and drop-offs, all contained within the property. As well, further down Weiler, opposite Iroquois Way, we have our access to the main townhomes. We have a diversity of housing form that has been created here in terms of sizing and typology. We've created courtyard units you might notice between building 6 and building 7. They have a common walkway, common courtyard, creating a unique access point for pedestrians. As well, and I know our landscape architect will speak about this more, we've created a pedestrian walkway so as to connect people along the site to the outdoor amenity and to connect them out along Weiler. We have provided for a very generous, almost 8,700 square foot outdoor amenity space. We want to get neighbors together, foster social connection. That includes play space, barbecue space, socialization spaces, and you feed through that through an internal walkway so as that people don't have to walk on a driveway in order to get access to their amenity for better pedestrian safety within the property. And as well, you would have seen the neighborhood commercial use that is proposed at the corner of Lochside and Weiler, facing the water, with the intention of outdoor patio space to create a vibrant access off of the active transportation corridor that this property sits on, both with respect to Weiler and Lochside. So here is an outlay of the current zoning and the proposed. So currently, two-story structures are permitted up to approximately 124,000 square feet of density. Through a zoning analysis with D'Ambrosio Architecture, we can confirm that it can approximately handle under the existing zoning about 275 motel units. It would be zoned for one residential unit and site coverage of 45%. Our current proposal is for 2.5 to 3 stories compliant with the official community plan, a density of 0.96, which equates to just over 7,700 square feet of additional space. So not a significant increase in density compared to prior iterations and concepts shared with the public. No motel units, 1,513 square feet of commercial space, 193 parking stalls, 97 bike parking stalls, and there's an asterisk there because we're counting 1-to-1 for the townhouse because you have a garage. You can put, I guess, as many bikes as you might wish in your garage. And each townhouse has a garage to accommodate 2 vehicles as well. One thing that I would like to note that you'll see within staff's report is that staff have given a consideration for council to seek out a bonus density contribution that would not be consistent with a fixed rate CAC. Or bonus density contribution, the suggestion of maybe the conversion of several of the west-facing residential units in favor of, for example, childcare space. That is simply not feasible for this project to incur, given the limited amount of additional density that is being sought. It would render the application dead on arrival. And so we respectfully ask that council not direct us down a process that would effectively render what we have spent time and effort to propose in a manner that will not allow us to economically deliver it. And as well, one of the other things that has been presented for consideration is a second recommendation from staff as it relates to further review of infrastructure and park DCCs. Through our review, we're not aware of any other applications that are being asked to go down that process, and it would be a bylaw process to our understanding that would be required in order to do that. So we respectfully ask that we not be treated as a one-off. We anticipate to comply with Sydney's existing public works bylaw and as well pay whatever DCCs are appropriate. I'm learning this evening those DCCs may be a heck of a lot higher, creating some other challenges for us. Here we see a breakdown of the type of homes that are being proposed, again talking about the diversity of unit type, breaking down the parking, looking at, we require 48 for the townhouses, providing 96, providing the 10 visitor parking spaces within the property as well, providing the 48 long-term through the garage, bike parking plus an additional 6 for short-term visitor, and the 8,676 square feet of additional amenity space. On the mixed-use site as well, we would require 49 parking stalls, providing 73, and proposing the appropriate amount of commercial and visitor space in that as well. And then amenity space, it totals out at 22% based on that lot size when you factor in both the amenity space at grade and the amenity space that's proposed at the roof. At this time, I'd like to hand things off to our lead architect, Mark Blackwood from Ekistics Architecture.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks, Mayor and Council. Hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I think Jordan did a pretty good job of doing the general kind of overview of the site in terms of access points and general site layout. I think a couple things that I would just like to highlight as well, in addition to his comments, is on Lot 2, which is the townhouse site to the west. There is sort of a shift in the patterning of the townhomes. So buildings 5, 6, 7, and 8, you'll notice are oriented in more of a north-south orientation. And a couple of reasons for doing this. One, it creates an interesting shift in the overall patterning of the development, but also helps for kind of solar exposure for those units and kind of giving the outdoor space in between and the lanes and the decks that are provided for those units more opportunities for different types of solar exposure throughout the day. Buildings 1 through 4 along Weiler are kind of that sort of boutique collection of townhomes that's front Weiler, maximum 5 units wide. So kind of a nice cadence of building massing along Weiler, creating a nice residential street with doors, front doors on the street, as Jordan mentioned, kind of completing that streetscape. I think part of the real strength of Lot 1 and the 3-story apartment building with rooftop amenity is kind of this, sort of neighborhood commercial node right on the corner, which really gives an opportunity for the public and residents to gather and to be sort of somewhat this sort of hidden gem coffee shop or bakery right on Lochside Drive with fantastic views to the water and sort of a landscape design that really will kind of foster gathering and socializing. Next slide, please. A couple sections here, just looking at some of the typical townhouse units. The section on the left is an A-type unit and really starts to sort of demonstrate on the right-hand side of that unit the 2.5-story massing along Weiler Street, opportunities for roof decks on those units, and kind of partially sunken lower levels because of the 2.5-story massing, and then a 3-story building face on the left-hand side, which would be on the internal strata lane portion of the project. And I think the sections also sort of demonstrate this lower roof profile, which begin to sort of reduce the overall height and massing of the buildings. This section on the right, which is C1, again, a similar fashion on the left, on the right-hand side of that section, rather, sort of illustrates that elevated mews in between buildings, giving us that 2.5-story building form, and then the 3-story building face, which would be on the internal strata lane on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. And then a couple of sections just through these 3-story apartment building. The top one kind of illustrates that flat roof profile to achieve kind of this low building, 3-story building massing along Lochside Drive, not too dissimilar to sort of 3-story buildings that are immediately to the north of us. And the lower section illustrates some localized projections above the roof, mainly just the access to the rooftop deck, which Joe will speak about. So what you're seeing there is really just a projection for the requirement for the elevator shaft and the stair. Next slide, please. Just a couple of views of some streetscape elevations. The top one illustrates the view of the apartment building from Weiler Street, and then kind of as you make your way to the west, the townhomes that begin to sort of take over. And the middle section there is the continuation of that section of sort of those 3 townhouse buildings that kind of make their way westward up Weiler, and sort of the smaller scale nature of those buildings. So 3 to 5 units per building max. And then the lower section illustrates that Lochside Drive elevation of the 3-story apartment building. And really our attempt here was to also sort of articulate the building into 3 primary massing elements to further break down the scale and length of that building, into those 3 volumes. Next slide, please. Now the perspectives here, this one here from the intersection of Weiler and Lochside, illustrates the character of that corner amenity space, but also begins to highlight some of the materials. And the project incorporates a lot of good quality materials like standing seam metal around some of the side roof elements, as well as wood-toned shake, both in the light and dark colors, creating contrast and variation. Metal and glass railings that kind of promote lightness and transparency. and then also soffits and kind of interior surfaces in kind of a wood tone material as well, sort of bringing warmth to the overall character of the architecture. And I think what that view also shows is this sort of layered landscape approach, which really kind of successfully negotiates that grade change due to the flood construction level that we're restricted to. Next slide, please. Now, looking eastward along Weiler, we're catching a glimpse of the townhome buildings, again, using those, that shingle cladding, again, in the light and dark tones, kind of breaking up the streetscape into the massing elements, and then the 3-story apartment building in the distance. Next slide, please. And then just more of a head-on streetscape view of the townhomes. And I think what's really important to kind of highlight here is that opportunity for those sort of elevated porches and front doors on the street, which really kind of highlight both eyes on the street and this kind of community and neighborhood feel that this streetscape can really benefit from. So I think those are the high-level comments. Again, kind of pressed for time, but I'd like to introduce Joe, our landscape architect.
Thank you, and I'll note we've reached the 15-minute mark.
Sorry, point of order. When the motion to extend it doesn't put a time limit on the presentation?
Oh, it didn't. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry, understanding the time limits, I'll try to be concise as possible. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Landscape site plan shows a number of key ideas for the parameter of the project. One of the key things is to enhance the street frontage along the Weiler Avenue, Lochside Drive, and intersection corner by introduction of street trees, planting boughs, seeding nodes, and pavings and signage improvements. Which also going to be in line with the city's active transportation plan. The project retains the existing cedar hedge along the west and the south side of the project, remaining a visual screen for the surrounding neighborhood. For the townhouse site, we are providing outdoor amenity spaces, required outdoor amenity spaces to serve the gathering area, featuring outdoor barbecue with pergola and lawns spaces for informal play and various outdoor activities. Additionally, we also designed the walking path into a linear gardens to increase the pedestrian usability and also increase the residents' social interactions. To improve the neighborhood impermeability, we have added a second path on the east end of the townhouse, providing access from the Weiler to our site. Next slide, please. This is the condo building roof plan. The roof plan amenity area has been strategically set back from the building edge to minimize its impact on the surrounding neighborhood. A number of the amenities, including a patio space under trellis with outdoor seating and outdoor kitchen with barbecue, is being set in this area. A lawn area also in the central spaces serve as an extension of outdoor patio, allowing for informal play and gathering activities. We also have the urban agriculture planters for those planting lovers. And also we designed a viewing deck for the residents to relax socializing and enjoy the view to the east, which is to take advantage of the ocean view. The purpose of these area design is really just to cater all the residents with all ages, including seniors and children, offering a diverse range of amenities. Next slides. The overall landscape characters represents a seaside village themes with a naturalized landscape style for the frontage of the streets and also across the site. We also utilize the terraced planting slope landscape to minimize the needs for the retaining walls. These not just soften the vertical changes, but also enhance the visible appeal of the frontage and the streetscape. Next slide, please. The comfortable human scale spaces are also provided through the use of premium outdoor furnitures, pergolas, paving materials, and carefully selected plantings. The planting materials also include native plantings and drought-tolerant species, which are suitable for local climates and consuming less irrigation water to support sustainability goals. This is the end of landscape presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Just to add to something that I forgot to spoke to as it relates to traffic. So one of the things you'll have seen within staff's report attached is a traffic study that we took on our own initiative to commission, because that was the only uniformed commentary we got from every single neighbor, is that is a challenge. And so that has pointed out a couple of visual obstructions for consideration of council, and as well when it came to speed, what we can do in addition to creating some terrific landscaping along Weiler is by creating those bump outs, it actually creates some narrowing of the road, and by doing that it creates natural calming. Vehicles are naturally going to drive slower when the road is narrower, and that's part of the challenge right now is that street is mostly empty on our side year round, with the exception of sort of weekends and the busy times when boat trailers are there in the summer, and that basically creates this sort of feeling of being able to go faster because you have more space. So we're trying to address that through the traffic calming that exists there. And I'll leave it at that and welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you. I will turn to my colleagues to see if there are questions. Councillor Garnett, go ahead.
Just point of order.
Oh.
Don't we have public participation?
I'm sorry, thank you. Yes, we have public participation first. Any public wishing to speak to this application, please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Gerald Moffat. I live at 9512 Lochside Drive. There's an awful lot of material to cover regarding this proposal, and 4 minutes is not a lot of time. So I'll just hit a few points that are not in the letter I sent to Mayor and Council earlier. The staff report authored by Ms. Verhagen contains some erroneous and tendentious language. Under the heading Zoning Bylaw 2015 in the staff report, she says that the subject property is currently zoned tourist commercial. There is no such category in the zoning bylaw. The actual designation is neighborhood motel. The word neighborhood carries significant weight, and omitting it is an unfortunate mischaracterization. Ms. Verhagen's report under staff comments, agenda package, page 47, appears to call for multiple commercial units. OCP section 835 sets a limit on the maximum size of a commercial unit, just over 2,000 square feet, but does not call for multiple such units. Under the OCP, multiple units may be permissible, but they are by no means required.
Mr. Humble? Okay.
Yeah, if I could just interject. I don't believe the intention of public participation is to actually criticize or comment on the staff reports, especially in this manner. So I would just request that the approach be reconsidered. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moffat, would you like to, I guess you can continue with your commentary only without personal reference to the staff?
Certainly, I won't make any personal references. Is it sufficient to call it the staff report?
I believe if you wish to phrase it as a question or note a comment for clarification, then perhaps staff can clarify later if there is something that they could do so. Thank you.
Thank you for the guidance. During the OCP review, many new neighborhood commercial sites were initially proposed throughout Sydney. They were all rejected by the time the OCP was finalized by Mayor and Council. It appears that neighborhood commercial is a somewhat moribund concept. The previous version of the Cedarwood redevelopment proposal allocated 6,000 square feet to commercial. This was resoundingly opposed by the neighborhood and is a major reason the developer has now scaled back to 1 unit. The neighborhood doesn't want a mini strip mall within 10 minutes walking distance of downtown. I don't think that's a fruitful avenue to pursue. I'm sure there'll be other topics to deal with later, but that's all I have to say for the moment. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Moffat. Are there other members of the public who'd like to speak? I see a hand. Come forward, please.
It's more questions. My name is Joanne Edwards, and I live in the neighborhood on Marvette, right across the street. This proposal is a lot better than anything we've seen. My question is more on the traffic. You mentioned slowing down Weiler, which is great, but it's more the intersection getting into Lochside that we're really concerned about. It's really hard to turn left, and I live on Marvette, so whatever happens there, what's going to happen to Marvette for being able to access getting onto Weiler, because the access to the commercial is directly across the street from our house. And as well, the initial plans I didn't remember seeing rooftop patios. That essentially creates 3-story buildings. So that is a little different than what I was imagining, that because it's going to make the buildings a lot taller. We're seeing that already with the rise with the rooftop access that they're building for the rooftop to the building right to the other side of us. So just consideration, it seems like a lot of considerations going into maximizing the solar exposure and the views for the people who will be living in this development, which is great, but I just ask that the people living across the street get the same consideration for the existing views that we have and the existing solar exposure that we have, that the design considers the setbacks to make sure that the people living around the development get the same consideration as our new neighbors will get. Because I'm personally looking forward to having neighbors on Weiler. I hope that the bike path is considered as part of that to access over to the Blue Overpass, because that is a bike path as well, and that it's a safe place for kids, and also hoping it'll bring trick-or-treaters to our neighborhood. So, but that it's mainly just that those impacts that the neighbors around that we're given the same consideration as our new neighbors will get.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I believe Mr. Milne can respond to some of those.
Excellent, thank you. As it relates to traffic, in the traffic report that was provided by Watts, there are 3 obstructions that are north along 5th Street, one of which is a Shaw and Telus box, the other of which is an existing bus stop with advertising on it, thereby blocking a visual, creating a visual block, and then beyond that, parking. And so one of the considerations that we would offer to council is that as part of the community amenity bonus density contribution, that those funds could be allocated towards the improvement, one, by moving the Shaw Telus box, and 2, through consideration of possibly the relocation of the bus stop to being in front of this proposed development, because the crosswalk exists there at the intersection, and the bus stop heading in the other direction is immediately opposite the street. And so given this redevelopment, it may be time, especially as well when there's a bus stop right in front of Iroquois Park, so you don't even get the full block before that bus stop then reoccurs along 5th Street. So we would be open to that as well. I believe Andy Kading is here if there's any specific questions around traffic. And then as it relates to the rooftop outdoor areas, they've been carved out. So maybe what I'll do is I'll leave that for maybe Mark Blackwood to speak to. But effectively what we've done is, instead of creating a box design and a series of just frankly boxes, we've taken a more traditional roof pitch structure and carved out an area of that in order to create that outdoor space. And so if that outdoor space wasn't to exist, the roof pitch would effectively remain the same. It is our intention, because we prefer that more traditional design style. And I would also point out that not all buildings have of the townhouses rooftop outdoor areas. I believe it's buildings 6 and 7 that do not, the ones that have a courtyard running down the middle to service their yard space.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, would you like me to add here, just from the rendering that's on the screen, so you can see here how the rooftop decks actually have essentially a flat roof, which, as Jordan mentioned, basically eliminates the bulkiness of what would otherwise be a pitched gable roof, or kind of a hip-styled roof that you would see on a townhouse project that doesn't have roof decks, or kind of a flat roof type of geometry. So really the introduction of the roof decks don't really introduce any additional massing to the project.
Thank you. Are there any further comments from the public? I'll call a second time. Seeing no additional speakers, I will close the public participation component and turn to my colleagues for questions for the applicant. Councillor Garnett, quick on the draw.
Thank you, Chair. Before I started, I do want to commend the developer for the amount of engagement they did in this community, and particularly Sydney as a whole, but particularly this neighborhood. In my judgment, you went above and beyond, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that you did that. Also commend you on the way you've redesigned it to fit to the OCP, commercial neighborhood townhouse, and the way you configured it in terms of the land uses that are available there, and also the parking. To have that much extra parking is pretty impressive, but for me, you actually applied visitor parking, which we rarely see. So that was an important component I think you added. Very appreciative of it. So my first question is around the design rationale, and I was pulling your last sentence right out of the agenda, saying GMC's core values of community diversity, sustainability, affordability, adaptability, and revitalization are expressed in this proposal for the development of the subject property. So I wonder if you could speak to how affordability, that particular core value, is expressed in the development.
Absolutely. So there's only obviously so much that we can do within the context of where we're at, but one of the main things that we've looked at is ensuring that we create a diversity of unit type and a diversity of sizing to accommodate as wide array as we possibly can. And so, Richard, if you could go back to the slide that broke down the sizes of the townhome and the condo units. So specifically as it relates to sizing, we have units in the townhomes that range from 1,094 square feet to a 2-bedroom, and as well 1,273 square foot 3-bedroom. So we're trying to create a diversity of unit type within the townhome so that there's a variety of different income levels and price points. So whether, affordability is a nebulous word, it means something different to everybody. But when we speak about affordability, we're also trying to create a diversity of housing type, and by doing so, we create a wider band of who has a housing opportunity. In addition, with respect to the condo units, we're creating units that are range from 510 square feet up to 2,000. So it's about that diversity of size. There is no specific program as it relates to affordability or grants that we have available to us to be able to unlock something at a below market rate. But in terms of affordability, that's kind of what we're speaking to.
Thank you. Sorry, the next sort of line of question I have is in regards to the traffic assessment or the transportation assessment that's referred to. So probably Mr. Kading might be best able to address the questions I have. So in the overall traffic study, I've gone through it quite a few times. I've read over and over and over. And so one of my first questions is, in your projections and forecasts, with particular reference to 2025, when the building would come online, in your numbers, were you factoring in the condo building, the Rise, which will be occupied by that point in likelihood, in terms of the 34 cars or potentially more that might come out of that property? Was that at all factored into the numbers that you forecasted?
No, I'm checking right now. I don't believe so.
Okay.
But if it was the case that it was not added, if you're saying it's 25 cars, if there's less than 50 cars, it'll have effectively no impact on the study intersections,
right,
which perform at a very high level.
Okay.
It's all LOSAs, 1 minor C and the PM peak hour. That suggests there's additional capacity on the roadway to handle more traffic, and 50 vehicles is within that limit.
Perfect, thank you. And you've raised the concerns around, and Mr. Milne spoke to it as well, the sight lines north. So you've addressed that, so that's great. And you do mention in the report that Talista, you don't deem it to be an issue for transportation with the added volume from this development. And I would agree with that context with a lot of what's discussed in the report, but I think as an overall context, as somebody who goes through that intersection every week and has driven it many times, I think when you look at the context of all the different things you're looking at, the cyclists, the pedestrians, where the bus stop is on the other side, and having to deal with the 50 kilometer an hour or more speed that people travel down there, there's so many things to look at that parking lot actually does become an issue, because sometimes you don't notice it when you're pulling out. And I've been unfortunate enough to have vehicles always seem to be leaving when I'm there. And also with the cyclists, recreational cyclists are one thing, experienced cyclists are another, because they can go anywhere from 30 to 45 kilometers an hour. And that's another factor when you're trying to pull off that street. So if you're adding more traffic, I think it all factors into it. And also the transit stop itself on the other side, I've seen cyclists, they don't tend to stay in the cycle lane. They will veer out of it in fear of, I think, of the bus pulling out without seeing them. I've seen that routinely. So my 2 more questions. So July and 1 day of measurement. Can you explain why those were chosen?
Why July and why only a single day?
Yeah, just the rationale for methodology.
Sure. So I'll address the single day first. That's sort of an industry standard.
Mm-hmm.
Traffic is not a static thing. I can't just go out to any intersection any day and measure traffic and get the exact same number. It varies by seasonality, by events, by day of the week. We don't do traffic counts on Mondays or Fridays because its variation is different.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, there is no true average day of traffic. So we do the best that we can in the limitations of the study, and generally that is a single day of traffic. That is an accepted standard of practice. That's not just our firm, that's an industry-wide standard, and I believe it's backed by some of the governing bodies like the Institute for Transportation Engineers. So it's well documented and well followed as far as practice goes. We consider it a statistically representative sample, despite its small size. And we take this into consideration when we write the report. If the report values that we had grabbed had shown levels of traffic operation that were, in the LOSC, LOSD, LOSE categories, we would take a harder look at these things and maybe say, well, are these numbers fully accurate? Were there things to consider? In this case, the performance was so good that it says to me that our counts are accurate and that there's no marginality that we need to be concerned about. Then to address specifically the July aspect, that has to do with more when we were engaged as a consultant. We have the study gets produced in a certain timeline. It's somewhere after we're engaged and when we, somewhere between when we're engaged and when we finish the report, we have to count the traffic. That happened to fall in July. That's advantageous for the town. Summer traffic volumes are higher than winter traffic volumes. Ministry data counters clearly show this. So so why July and why 1 day? Basically, that's when we were engaged and we followed industry standard.
Great, thank you. It's just good information for the public to know that.
Yeah.
I would just also add that typically in that particular area, what's different about the weekend is you have increased boat trailer traffic and a dramatic increase in cyclist traffic. So those are just 2 things that wouldn't be captured, but I don't know how that would impact the numbers. And as far as the overall safety of the intersection, that's another issue for MODI, and they'll report on what they see in the development and what needs to be done. But as far as the added traffic, I think it will have I think there's a reason why the neighborhood's concerned about it, and I don't disagree with them. I think there will be concerns. My last question is with regards to, again, the forecasting and projections. And I looked through the report and I couldn't see anywhere, perhaps you could tell me whether or not there were any thoughts given to the vehicular traffic from the Anacortes Ferry.
I'm sure, as you're aware, the projections for the return of the Anacortes Ferry are, there is no projected return for it. So we did not take that into account. In relation to the report, if that was to come in, what I would say is that ferry traffic tends to be surge-based in that the ferry shows up and then all the traffic gets off of it, and then it's pretty quickly it's over and traffic returns to a normal state. So, how would that relate to the report? Well, further study would probably be recommended to see if that was a significant issue. I mean, obviously this is directly, this is very close to the ferry terminal, so there, it's a point of concern. That being said, the access to the highway would be north of the terminal, and one would expect that much of the traffic, especially coming from the US, is coming over for a day trip, perhaps going to downtown Sydney, and so the traffic would be, and then to the highway to get to the broader Victoria area. So a good portion of that traffic would pull away from the site and away from the subject intersection. So, you know, more study would be needed, but until there's a date of return for the ferry, this, you know, that's, you know, somewhat of a futile exercise.
Yeah, okay. It's just that we've heard there's the potential for 2025, and 2030 was in the initial report. So it's within the constructor times of when the building will be up, and your far outreach look to 2035, I believe. And it is a concern for me because that information, I think, it will directly impact that neighborhood, because from what I understand, actually a majority of the traffic goes down that way to the roundabout to go to Victoria. They don't go through Sydney because it's a more accessible way for them to get there without traffic lights. So it is a concern going forward for me in terms of the traffic safety, incorporating that many more new vehicles in that area with the Anacortes Ferry traffic at such time that it returns. I just want to put that out there for the developers that is something I think that will need to be looked at. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I had Councillor Rintoul next.
Thank you, Chair. Question through to Mr. Milne, please. Your presentation, the start of the presentation, you made reference to a couple of items in the staff report that you had suggested you would like to see council take a contrary position on. One, I think, has been already spoken to at length, and that was around additional commercial space for the project. I'm content with what you've had to say about that, and with what we heard from feedback from neighbors as well. The other component to that you commented on was, I believe, and I'd like you to clarify this, you said you had some concern with the suggestion that staff analyzed potential effect of the development on the need for infrastructure park requirements in line with the town's OCP. Did I understand that was your concern correctly? And if so, could you speak to your rationale for that statement?
Yes, that was correct. And the rationale is that the infrastructure upgrades that would be triggered as a result of this project, I believe, are already governed under the Sydney Public Works bylaw. And so there's already a mechanism, a bylaw in place within which to review and address those considerations. And we would ask, we are not familiar, we watched recent applications including 2060 White Birch. We are not familiar with this similar requests, similar to the Park DCC's, i.e. recommendation number 2 under staff's report, being asked of any other projects. And our application is for an existing 45-unit motel property turning into 97 units. So, you know, less of a net gain in terms of number of units comparative to the 60 proposed at 2060 White Birch. So we're just simply asking not to have our application be treated as a one-off and to be treated consistently with how other applications have been treated, and to do so in a manner that may create unnecessary additional time. We believe in the value of process. However, we just ask that we be treated fairly as it relates to that process, and that we not be asked to go through additional steps and unknown amounts of time as to what it would take, because as staff have reported, they would need to come back to council to get further direction. And quite honestly, we don't have the time available, I think, in order for a process like that to be treated on a one-off basis. And similar to the Parks DCCs, it's our understanding the only way to effectuate something like that, by having us deal with additional infrastructure or Park DCCs, is through a new bylaw. And so that would be a whole additional process.
So yeah. Thank you for that. I guess that maybe what staff would come back to council with is that explanation that it requires some bylaw revisions or a new bylaw, and they would, I'm sure, be sensitive to the timing of this. So I'm not I don't see it particularly as this not being somewhat unique, and that I'm inclined to support the staff recommendation in that area, just so that you're aware. But thank you for providing your additional rationale. I think it's a prudent recommendation from staff. My next question through the chair is with respect to the traffic study, so perhaps to the consultant who's here virtually. I don't recall seeing it, so forgive me if it was in there, but any contemplation of recommendation or consideration of a traffic circle at this location, and is that because there's not enough real estate there? Is it because the volume perhaps isn't there, although we know there's one very close by? If you could speak to perhaps the absence of that recommendation, please.
Yeah, I looked at it for roundabout. I tried really hard to make one fit. I tried an oval design. I even kind of messed around with what's called a dumbbell one, which would have the park be one piece of it and then the intersection be another piece of it. There's a lack of right-of-way, and besides lack of right-of-way, the biggest thing is that it would encroach onto the path, the nature part of the path. So on that eastern edge. My initial sketches on it, which I'll note is not a final design, were there was a fair amount of encroachment that I thought would probably not be well received. That, the relocation of the bus stop, some of the other real estate considerations, it unfortunately did not appear to me that it would work well, which I'm a huge roundabout enthusiast, and I always try and look to make sure, I have a roundabout first policy, and I was not able to get it to pencil in the way that I had hoped. So that is why I did not include it.
Okay, so thank you. I find that interesting that you contemplated it and felt one would be suitable there if there's enough space, and I don't know if that makes a difference in terms of the siting of this building potentially or not, but I understand your reference to the right-of-way and the path across the street. Good. Thank you very much for your comments there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Were there, Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a few comments up front about reiterate the appreciating the extra parking. I think it's a big deal. I can't recall any recent developments that have exceeded the parking requirement, and that's often a significant irritant to neighbors. So I think that's great. It'll lessen the impact. Also, I really like the outdoor amenity space. Was it 8,700 square feet?
Yeah, just under 8,700, 8,676 for the townhouse. Represents 9% of the total site area of the townhouse.
Okay, and yeah, so really like that. I like the rooftop gardens. When we're talking about, park space, and thank you for your explanation about the parks and the DCC, because that was also, I was still looking for some clarity on that. And I guess, and maybe staff will cover this later, but I'm presuming that we wouldn't, my presumption is that when a developer comes forward, we tell you, here's the things that you have to pay for. And if there was something later that, I would presume that would be future developments, but not for things that are in the pipe, so to speak. But I guess we'll find out from staff, maybe further on that later. And I guess, in regards to additional park space, what I'd be looking at is, you're providing a significant amount of green space for people there, that 8,700 square feet, courtyard or rooftop gardens, the courtyard green space in between some of the units there. So I like that. In regards to the commercial space, so if you could just refresh my memory, how many residential units would we, or those townhouse units, would we lose there if, you didn't do your little jig jog into that front parcel?
So you'd lose about four, likely four townhouses if we weren't to do that zigzag. And so sort of for family-oriented housing, that's one of the things we're quite proud of, is this is quite an abundant and a diversity of family-oriented housing. And one of the visions that we see and would love to see happen, regardless, who knows what it does, the market will do what the market does, but is intergenerational housing, where we see an opportunity for a grandfather and a grandmother to buy a single level appropriate accommodation in the condo building for themselves, and hopefully be able to help out the reality in our current housing market, help out a son or a daughter or a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law and their grandkids be able to get into a townhome in a location that is really great proximity to Sydney's best parks and walking distance to the downtown core.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, and thanks for your previous explanation for that, and it was good to hear from the public as well. And I think that seems to be reasonable to me, so I'm not, I'm fine with the amount of commercial space as it is. I don't see a need to expand that. One thing I was wondering about, we talked about you're talking about traffic calming on Weiler and the bump outs. So is that something that you would propose, or is that something staff would do? And I guess the reason I'm wondering is because that's quite a common bike route there, whether there would be any concern about the bump outs making it more difficult for bikes to go down that.
Well, right now, the bump outs only go as far as effectively where vehicles would be parked, and so there'd already be an obstruction essentially with vehicles. But by creating those bump outs, it wasn't a request of staff to my best recollection. It was something that we had felt would be an appropriate traffic calming measure, as well as a way of layering landscaping on the street. And what it also does is, Richard, if you actually go back to the slide that we were on, the site plan slide, you'll see we've actually created a public area to sit. So we've kind of recessed by creating that green space almost halfway up effectively the townhouses. There's some public bench seating. No, Richard, just to the right. There we go. Yeah. So there's a couple of benches. So if you're a mom and you're walking with your stroller and you need to stop for a minute, this gives you an opportunity to have a bit of a reprieve. It gives neighbors an opportunity to sit and have a conversation. So it's not just a public boulevard that gets you from point A to point B. It's a public boulevard that's materially expanded from what it is. I believe it's almost 7-foot sidewalk that's being proposed as part of this. So a very wide and generous public space for people to be able to walk in, and inclusive of that, some sitting areas along it to be able to create that opportunity for reprieve for pedestrians as they're going about their day. Right.
Okay, great. The other question I had was in the staff report makes reference to some upgrades that were kind of planned for that area anyways in terms of storm water mains and sewer. And so I'm wondering, is that something you're aware of and that you factored into your timeline?
So our proposal contemplates our sewer being connected off of Weiler. To our understanding from J.E. Anderson, who is our civil engineer, there is no capacity issue if we were to tie into the existing sewer on Weiler, and we actually don't create any storm issues. So we don't require any upgrades to storm as part of our project. There may be some downstream implications to sewer that the town is already dealing with existing capacity and may be looking to upgrade. But that would be part of what I understand would be the traditional process of operating under the Public Works bylaw and working with staff in the engineering department to identify what our application may create in terms of additional flow and how we participate in consideration of that.
Right, okay. And just one more on traffic. So I'm a little bit skeptical about whether traffic will actually be impacted there or not. Well, there's obviously going to be more. But I do like the idea of at least moving that, whatever those are, they're the hydro boxes or things. So that seems to be at least one thing that we might do to mitigate and perhaps use the CCA contribution there to deal with that. So that seems to me reasonable. And I guess, yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yep. Councillor Novak, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I don't have a lot to say about this. I think it's a great development. I live in the neighborhood. Personally, I think what's there now is problematic, but this will completely change the atmosphere in that area, and I think it's a benefit, a huge benefit. And I like it the way it is. I don't think it needs a lot of tweaking, although I suspect that between now and the time that shovels hit the ground, there always are some tweaks. But two questions, two things that I do have some concerns about. Number one, the commercial area. I think the commercial area is going to be a hub of that development and of the neighborhood, much the way Marigold has been in the lower Lochside area. And my question is there any way to get more patio space there? The patio space, as it appears in your drawings, is relatively small. And I think there might be benefits to whoever operates that and to the community at large to have greater patio area, especially since people in Sydney do have a habit of sitting outside even in the worst possible weather.
Thank you for that question. So unfortunately, the Zoom box is not doing us any favors in kind of blocking the image of the commercial space, but for everyone's benefit, the patio is proposed to be the full width of the commercial space and the full depth of the commercial space to the retaining wall. I'll ask Mark if he can correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding, the only way to expand that patio space any further, and I can't speak to exactly how big it is, but I do believe it is a good size. The only way to expand it further would be to, instead of having that soft tiered landscaping as you kind of gently head up next to the stairs, would be to have a much taller and further out retaining wall that would allow the extension of the patio. So i.e. instead of a retaining wall, landscaping tiered, and another retaining wall, you'd lose that landscape buffer, push the retaining wall out, and you'd end up with a higher retaining wall right kind of almost at the face. And that would be the only way to accommodate that. Mark, would that be adequate?
Yeah, that's right, Jordan. I think it is that balance between that softness of kind of creating that grade change, and I think that's kind of more evident in the perspective here. I think there is a good amount of patio space there, and I think part of the design was to also create these kind of longer and more kind of generous steps as well. So, I think by default, even these steps become an area to sit and use them as kind of more informal seating as well as part of the landscape, not just as a means to get from kind of the lower to the upper patio area. So I think it provides that opportunity for kind of multiple areas for seating as well, but the patio space does go that full length of the CRU unit, so you're going to get a fair number of people up there.
It as well wraps the corner, so you can kind of see on the right here how there's like basically two. It's a smaller opportunity because the commercial space doesn't go down Weiler as far as obviously it goes down Lochside. The majority of its frontage has been positioned along the waterfront side to create the most amount of desirability, frankly, for those who would utilize the space.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for the traffic consultant. As I said, I live in the area and I'm confronted with that intersection on a daily basis. And to be quite frank, I never have an easy time getting from Whaler to Lochside. It's just very difficult for all the reasons that you outlined in your study. The only thing that I didn't notice discussed, and I don't know if it's feasible, and I recognize that it's not within the bounds of the town of Sydney's ability to make this change, but would traffic lights at that intersection, because of the offset between Tallista Park and Weiler, would lights help to mitigate that problem, especially as the traffic numbers increase over time?
That is a good question. I do not believe that the traffic signal would be ministry level warrants in its current, in this configuration with this development. Now, in the future, as other development comes online, maybe that will change. But I think maybe a different way to allude to this is that, and our report makes mention of this, that the intersection really needs to have a holistic look. One of the other things that was very marginal in our analysis was the need for a northbound left turn lane. And one of the things that I struggled with as a designer, as we tried to mock it up, was how you fit that lane in there without really shifting the roadway in a kind of a not great way. Sorry, not particularly articulate, but it's, it gets a little weird with the lane alignment. and trying to squeeze a little turn lane in there, with also trying to service that bus stop in its present location and without bleeding over too much into the parkland again. In general, the two intersection system of the park and Weiler should be looked at more holistically. And competent engineering design firm such as Watt or one of our competitors would be well suited to assist the town with that broader vision. It's important to note that the cyclists that make up such a large portion of users, especially on the weekend, have to be accommodated in a certain, in a safe and effective manner. And part of the reason that the roundabout didn't work out very well was trying to accommodate them in a, to make sure that they were well accounted for. So there's a broader kind of thinking about what this road should look like, how it should interact with the park, and what this intersection in particular should look like. And perhaps as potential future changes to the Lochside Trail in this area, the on-road part becomes a little bit more protected for cyclists in the future. This could all be looked at holistically.
Thank you. Yeah, the traffic on Whaler coming onto Lochside and in that area in general is only going to increase dramatically.
Councillor, I'm going to ask you not dispute the findings of the report, but rather focus on asking questions to because I'm worried that we're going to have a situation where we start debating with the consultant based on, our conjectures about the future.
I'm not arguing. I'm
sorry.
just suggesting that these things are a lot more important, I think, than we're.
Duly noted. Do you have a question for the consultant?
That's all. No, I'm done. Thanks.
I'm going to look to other councillors, see first-time speakers' questions. Thank you. Councillor, or Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Milne, for your presentation, and to your colleagues for being available to take questions this evening and present. My first question we know that two comprehensive development zones are proposed because of the neighborhood commercial area and the neighborhood townhouse area. You did address it in the letter of rationale with regards to the requirement for adaptable units, being 10 in the neighborhood commercial portion and 10 in the neighborhood townhouse, and you've chosen to locate all 20 in the neighborhood commercial. Can you speak to the rationale for that, please?
Yes, so the rationale for locating all of the adaptable units within the proposed mixed-use multifamily building is simply based on the form of housing and being one that is more easily adaptable to a fully accessible unit in the future should someone wish to do that or need to do that. And so more so from a cost perspective, it's more economical for that to be an end user to convert, and more likely to be a housing form that a person who may be in that need would be looking for, one that is serviced by a commercial elevator, one that has appropriate, for example, ramping along Weiler to provide for safe handicap access onto Weiler at the corner. So more so thinking about where would be most suitable.
Thank you. If you could turn to the slide that has that corner elevation again, please.
You mean the rendering?
Yeah, with the stairs, the one.
Yep. There we
Yeah,
go.
that's the one. So I just want to note something here, which we've all seen, and then asked to go to 2 slides ahead. And that is, we know the elevation of the roadway and the ground today, and we can see that's elevated. You have spoken to flood control level as being a factor there. So if, just noting, how we see a noticeable rise there, if we could just go 2 slides ahead. And so I think we see here as well where the ground floor will be, is actually a little bit above what is the current ground level as well. And would that be taking into account flood control level as well?
Yes, all structures are at this height as a result of flood control level and have been designed to be in compliance with Sydney's definition of a 2.5-story townhome structure, which I believe is no more than 4 feet above the grade to underside or top side of the sort of main floor system. So what is contemplated on the space below, you see that front door, which is the main floor, is would be consistent with the elevations, is simply garage and parking space for the townhouses that are partially subterranean.
Thank you. So my follow-up to that is that we know that, and it's stated in the staff report that, and we're aware that a flood control level recommendation by a professional engineer is required. And the recommendation that came forward for this project is 4.38 meters, if I remember correctly. It indicates in the staff report that further discussion will have to be held with regards to it not being taken into account fully in this project design. Can you speak to the rationale of why you didn't take into account the full flood control recommendation in the engineer's report?
So to my knowledge, that is not the case. We have taken into consideration the fullness of the floodplain construction level, and in fact, staff had asked us last week, I believe it was, to update the report because the report was dated, I believe, 2022, and this afternoon an updated report was provided to staff from the qualified engineer.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. My last question is with regards, going back again to the rezoning application and rezoning to 2 different zones. And consideration was given by staff, as noted in the report, that given the changes in our official community plan to this site, to have a portion of it neighborhood commercial, which is an existing C2 zone in our current zoning bylaw, appreciating that it is under review, and that the neighborhood townhouse is also a zone, an RM5 zone in our current zoning. And staff looked in the report as to the feasibility of actually rezoning to those uses which we have in our zoning bylaw. And I think when council was considering the land use designations for this property during the official community plan review, we were giving consideration to what we might envision in terms of neighborhood commercial and neighborhood townhome. However, the report indicates that we are, as the applicant, you are looking to for comprehensive development zones because of the variances that would be required if we were to rezone to C2 neighborhood commercial, and the variances that would be required if we were to rezone to neighborhood townhome. And so some of them are with setbacks, some of them are to do with heights, some of them appear to be on the townhouse site on Weiler. This, and hence this slide, is that the way the balconies are, or the way the rooftop balconies are designed here, that it actually creates the additional height requirement that would normally be in the neighborhood townhouse zone. Can you speak to why, being aware of what our C2 neighborhood commercial zone is and our RM5 neighborhood townhouse zone is, why you didn't come within those parameters?
Yeah, so part of it is the way in which we're looking to split the property up into 2 to deal with townhouse strata for one side, so a strata that is more appropriate and will deal with the costs and maintenance associated with that form of the site versus a strata that will deal with the other form of site. So part of that density consideration is the way that we've looked at the subdivision. As well, our site is very specific, and I don't believe those zones were developed at a time when the floodplain construction level was a consideration. And so because of the things that we're trying to achieve with this specific site consideration around the amount of outdoor amenity space associated with each individual use and what that means for how we locate buildings appropriately based on the existing site configuration, our RM5 would have been an appropriate zone for the townhouse component, but my understanding from reading staff's report, and I could have misread, I could be wrong, but one of the main considerations is the fact that it also accommodates apartment use, and that's not a use that would be compliant with the townhouse designation under the OCP. Similarly, as a result of us deciding to do additional townhouse units instead of more commercial space and push up Weiler, it actually increases the density as it relates to the site that would otherwise be C2. So that's part of the consideration is if we were to take away those townhouses and have more land area associated with the neighborhood commercial, we would end up basically being able to spread that density of the neighborhood commercial over more land area and possibly come in under the requirements for C2. So one of the only other things I would add is that, and this is sort of, quite frankly, in opposition of my best interest or developer's best interest, but CD zoning is also quite heavily utilized in a lot of municipalities because it does create a very prescriptive zone regulation in terms of what can be done on a property as opposed to a schedule zone like an RM5 or a C2, which has a lot more flexibility in it. So often CD zones are utilized in more complex and comprehensive developments, hence the name, in order to be able to make sure that the community understands exactly what they're getting as opposed to sort of the traditional schedule zones.
Thank you for the answer, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Duck, you have not spoken yet, no?
I'd just like to say if I'd like to move forward to the staff report and the recommendation.
I have not asked my questions yet, so I will go ahead with those. I have three. I think mine are probably simpler because I'm the only one here not worried about traffic because I know that cars require oil, especially the ones that get plugged in. I like the pedestrian focus of this development and the number of pass-throughs you put in and the consideration to the separation of the pedestrians and the vehicles on the back end. I've been in townhouse developments that have failed to do that and felt how hostile they were to people going there, especially the trick-or-treaters, as one of the neighbors mentioned. And so I appreciate the little things that were done to make this feel more like a neighborhood. So one of my questions were, so since all of the adaptable units are in the condo, there's an elevator that's on the roof to that rooftop patio. It goes all the way.
Correct. That's one of the considerations as an example that wouldn't align us with C2 zoning is that roof projection and some of the proximities.
Okay, thank you. So which leads to the second one, which was the potential, the neighborhood concerns about privacy to the surrounding neighborhood and their own, blocking of solar radiation. And there isn't there isn't a shadow study that comes with this. The setbacks are more than the previous buildings, but I think the heights on some of them are taller. So can you speak to the consideration and how much the sight lines are from those rooftop patios, the consideration that went into, not peering down into people's yards while still allowing the people in there to obviously have viewpoints, and what the shading considerations might be on the south and the west sides.
Yeah, so maybe what I'll do is I'll hand that off to Mark to speak to. As it relates to the townhouses, one thing I can say is as they've been carved out of the roof, as I spoke to earlier, they've been done so in a way to minimize visibility to neighbors. So as an example, the units in Building 5 that are on the most westerly portion of the property, they only face to the east. So for example, you can't face into the neighbors to behind you just based on the way they've been cut out. Similarly, that's basically how all the rooftops have been done in order to be able to mitigate overlook to those existing neighbors. As it relates to solar shadowing, I'll hand it off to Mark, and maybe Mark, you could speak to that consideration.
Yeah, I think some of the benefits of this site is the single-family homes to the south are exactly that. They're south of us. So the shadowing impacts of this development are essentially none. The lower 2.5-story townhomes along Weiler Street, they have the benefit of being kind of relatively low scale. We have the buffering of Weiler, and then the single family homes across the street to the north, so there's a fair bit of distance there. So any shadow lines or any shadows cast by this development really won't kind of extend deep into adjacent properties. So I think just the way this property sits in the proximity of the roads and the separation that creates really limits the impact of shadowing on neighbors. Maybe very early morning, to the, some shadowing may occur to the, to the west, but that's, that's pretty quickly rectified by mid-morning, because again, those are only 2.5-story townhomes, set well back from the western property line.
Thank you. And my final question, looking at that front staircase that was in rendering 1 that we've seen so many times, I don't see a wheelchair ramp. So where is the wheelchair access that goes to the commercial patio or the commercial space?
Yeah, so just west of the stair, where the cursor hands pointing now, there's a ramp which brings you up both to the commercial CRU, but also to the residential entry, so that entry is fully accessible. Okay,
thank you. It was the shared entry. Thank you. Those were my remaining questions that had already been asked by my colleagues. Thank you. Councillor Duck, would you like to move the recommendation?
Well, do you want to seek staff's report first?
Staff report. I'm sorry. Staff, would you like to speak to your report? Introduce your report.
Thank you. I believe it's all contained in the report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I'd like to move forward with the recommendation.
Councillor Garnett has a question. I was gonna say, if you had the question, you'd get it first, but Councillor Garnett is first on the question again.
I'm potentially saving you a recommendation here, so thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. 1A in the recommendation, there was communication earlier in the day that indicated the development variance permits might have been coming into staff, so do we still need to move that recommendation, or have they been received?
Thank you. I believe the application has been received.
So we can just do 1 and eliminate A out of that? Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I will ask if anyone had questions from staff regarding the report. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yes. Also, in regards to the recommendation, we had some correspondence earlier today in regards to recommendation 2 and whether this was required at this time, and my understanding is that it's normal for staff to analyze the potential effects on a development and the need for infrastructure, and so that we didn't need to provide that direction. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. And then just if staff could just provide a bit of clarity. I'm still a bit fuzzy on the comments made by Mr. Milne and what's in the staff report regarding these DCCs for parks. I'm trying to understand whether the DCC for parks, is that something that we already have established that we're applying to all developments, or is this something new that we're thinking of doing?
Through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe, I guess staff's position on this is that the current DCC regime in Sydney is based on the previous OCP. So for the current motel, we've just had a new OCP done. The next step after that, and something that staff is working on, is to update that DCC bylaw. So I guess from that perspective, this development can be seen as a bit premature. And so that's something I think that staff need to do in this case is go and look at what are those impacts, unfortunately in advance of a full comprehensive DCC review.
Okay, so I guess I'm just trying to understand. So does that mean that obviously we have to update our DCC bylaw, but any development that's currently sort of in the pipe, so to speak, they would fall under what is currently in place, and once the new we make changes to our DCCs, that would be for future developments. I'm just wanting to know if that's correct.
I think what staff are proposing here is similar to the approach taken with 2180 Beacon Avenue, which is a bit of a case-specific analysis in terms of infrastructure and looking at what the impacts of this specific development might be on infrastructure and parks needs in the community, and then suggesting that council use their discretionary power through the zoning amendment to require those.
Okay, so it's not currently something in our bylaws or legislation?
There are DCCs in place. I'm not sure specifically what those are.
Okay.
But again, those are DCCs intended for the previous land use on this property, not for the new OCP designations.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. I think that's it.
Mr. Duck, you may go ahead.
Thank you. I do have a question through to staff just to further clarify that. Do we need item 2 then? Or is this a precursor that we're not yet at that point of evaluating DCCs to include it here? I'm kind of confused by your response to the previous question. So do we need item 2 on this recommendation?
Yeah, sorry.
Through the chair to Councillor Duck, I believe Mr. Humble already answered that question previously. Did you want to repeat your response to that, Randy?
Yeah, so staff, in hindsight, looking at this, don't believe that we require a council resolution regarding number 2, so it's not necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And I'll move forward with the recommendation as amended. The zoning amendment application number RZ 100109 and development permit application number DP 100842 to amend the zoning designation of the property at 9522 Lochside Drive in order to allow for the development of a 2.5 to 3-story mixed-use multi-unit residential/commercial development containing 97 dwelling units and a ground floor commercial space. Be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for review and comment subject to period.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Do we have any further discussion on that? Then I will call the question. All in favor? That's unanimous. It goes forward.
Point of order, Chair, can we take a recess, please?
Yes, I will look to 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 8:50. Right, it is now, it is 8:51. I'll prepare to call the meeting back to order again. I haven't used the gavel yet.
Where's that?
All right, thank you. Are you up? Okay. Wait for the public to clear out after that public participation, and I will now call the meeting back to order. It is 8:52, and we will continue with staff reports. We have a staff report on the draft accessibility plan, which we previously received a presentation on from the consultants who prepared it, left turn, right turn, but we have, the staff have their report as well, and if staff would like to speak to that.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have too much to add in terms of specifics following the presentation, but I will just note that the Accessible BC Act requires that municipalities establish an accessibility committee, which the town has done with SPAC, establish a public feedback process, which we have on our website, and develop an accessibility plan, which if council adopts this tonight, will fulfill our requirements under the Act. Of course, the work does not end there. There's still the question of implementation of the plan, and that's something that staff will be working on in the coming months and the 3 years over the course of the plan, and when the province requires us to update it on that 3-year cycle. I mean, staff are already working on this stuff. Outside residents have provided good input into some initiatives like accessible parking in the past, and the engineering department is already updating some other standards in terms of accessibility as well. So it's definitely something that we've already been working on and we will continue to work on in the future. This is obviously something new that the province has implemented for municipalities, so there's the question of resourcing and funding for some of these projects. But as we look further into implementation, we will bring forward projects as they arise. And of course, there's internal work to be done as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I will look to my colleagues if there are any questions for staff on this. I will first note our SPAC, as staff have noticed, have seen this already twice and asked questions. Their last review, they had no further questions. So if you have questions, keep that in mind as you go forward about what their comments were. Thank you. I see no further questions. Oh.
No, I'm just gonna say.
No, I was
Councillor Garn,
Go for it.
Are you guys questioning or moving?
Just gonna move the recommendation.
Okay.
I'll move the recommendation that the Town of Sydney Accessibility Plan be adopted as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Do we have further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm, of course, in support of the motion. I think it's a great plan, and it's back.
Point of order. As the mover, I get to speak first.
Oh,
were you
sorry.
going to speak? I'm sorry, I didn't
Thank
see
you.
your
I
hand.
didn't see it there.
I know, because I know you're going to have a lot more to say than me.
No, not
So-
really.
So I just want to say in moving this that I pulled one particular sentence out of the report, out of the actual survey and results. And I think we've come a long way as a community. I think we're making great strides in this area. But this struck me, and I'll quote here, the most prominent response to the impact questions was the sense that their needs were not respected or accounted for. So clearly based on that given that this survey was done in 2023, we clearly have a lot of work to do yet still. And I think we have to be mindful of that as we move forward, even though we've made great strides, that there is a lot still yet to be done. And that's all I had to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconder, did you wish to speak before Ms. Councillor
Only to say that I appreciate the work that went into this on SPAC, the consultants and staff, but certainly a great leap forward, and I think a good guideline going forward, so fully support it going forward. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So my only comment on this, and I won't make a motion on it tonight because we've got council again to pass this, but just on the implementation. So, and I know that it's on the agenda for strategic planning. So I know that there's mention that, staff are working on some things and projects will be brought forward as they arise. I think an important thing is perhaps one thing we might want to consider is, SPAC has endorsed what's in the plan, but it might be a good idea to get some input in them on what they think areas of focus might be. There also might be some opportunities for members of SPAC to actually work on things. There was a couple things in here that I'd just kind of touch base with staff in terms of maybe there's educational bits that SPAC committee members could work on and bring that back for council's consideration. So I'll percolate on that for a while, and maybe we'll have some further discussion at strategic planning and at next council in terms of what implementation would look like for the plan. That's all.
Thank you. And I'm just going to, I have a kind of a question arising through to staff. Since this is SPAC we keep mentioning, and this is not just simply a Town of Sydney accessibility plan, we're harmonizing with the other municipalities. Do we know what, whether North Saanich and Central Saanich have received this, their committees of the whole yet? I see a nodding from Councillor, yes?
I can just jump in, it was in the report, yeah.
I think I could, it was mentioned actually by the consultant that
I'm sorry, I
it
missed it.
no, it's okay, it's been adopted, the plan's been adopted in North Saanich, and Central Saanich is still pending. They haven't, hasn't come forward to their council yet.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm sorry I missed that. All right. Okay. Seeing no further comments, I will call the question on the recommendation. All in favor? And that's unanimous. We'll move forward to the third quarter budget variance report. Mr. Hissick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The budget variance report covers approximately the first 3 quarters of this year. And year-to-date operating results are presented up to the date of the report rather than just the 9-month mark, which puts several functions slightly over the 75% point for the year. One reason, for example, is that the budget for personnel costs is closer to 81% for the year-to-date than 75%. So that automatically tends to inflate some of the functions. So on the operating side, we're doing reasonably well for the year, all in all. Investment revenues continue to be higher than expected, and savings on the RCMP contract should ensure we come in well under budget overall. The capital budget has seen significant activity with 56 of 98 projects either completed or in progress. And planning is underway for some of the projects that have not yet seen any costs. But as usual, some projects will be carried forward for completion. So in the staff report, which is lengthy, we've included 70 detailed notes on various operating and capital items, but would be pleased to address any questions council may have.
Thank you. Are there questions from council for staff on this report? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. Just one. With regards to B30, the Beacon West Roundabout, and appreciating the Victoria Airport Authority is managing the project, but looking at the numbers, it's hard to gauge. So has there been any communication from the VAA that the project is trending on budget?
We do get monthly progress billing, so we are aware of what the costs are. At this time, we have no reason to expect it'll be over our budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you. Are there any further questions? All right, seeing none, I'll look for a motion. I'm sorry, this is just a receipt for information. Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but I do just have a comment, and I just want to thank staff for this report. And I think a particular line at the end of the report is indicative. Currently, it is anticipated that the $432,000 in surplus funding that was used to balance the 2023 budget and minimize the tax increase may only be partially drawn upon. So I want to thank staff. I mean, with the detailed notes, we can see that staff have been prudent in a number of areas, and things have come in under budget. When we've seen things over budget, there's been explanation for that. But on balance, we're financially healthy, And just want to thank staff for all the work that they do day to day to bring this report forward.
Thank you. Requiring no motion, there is no other business, and I will look to adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.